place to ensure the transparency in the management of these funds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kavindu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to read my statement on the loss of documents used to print title deeds. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Orders 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee of Lands, Environment and Natural Resources regarding the loss of security documents used to print title deeds by the government printers. Mr. Speaker, sir, this incident possesses a significant threat to the integrity of lands ownership documents in our country and could potentially lead to widespread land fraud. The Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development must take immediate and decisive action to address these critical issues. In the statement, the committee should, 1, explain the actions being taken to recover the stolen security papers used to print title deeds, as well as the measures implemented to track and retrieve these documents and prevent their misuse for fraudulent purposes. 2, present a progress report on the investigations concerning the theft of the said documents, focusing on identifying the individuals and land cartels involved, along with the strategies implemented to strengthen security protocols to the government printer and the pertinent institutions to avert similar occurrences in the future. 3, outline the steps taken by the State Department of Lands and Physical Planning to raise public awareness about the risks associated with land fraud and the importance of verifying the authenticity of the deeds and all other documents related to lands registration, including but not least to survey plans, mutation forms, and deed plans. And 4, appraise the Senate on the ministry's long-term plans to leverage modern technology while implementing protocols to protect paper title deeds from the damage, loss, and theft. Senator Agnes Kavindu, MP, Senator Machakos County. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Chimera.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a request for statement on roaming lions along Mackinnon Road in Kwale County. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Land, Environment and Natural Resources concerning reported cases of lions roaming along Mackinnon Road in Kwale County. In the statement, the committee should, number 1, establish the circumstances that led to the lions escaping a natural habitat without the knowledge of Kenya Wildlife Service officers. Number 2, assess the damage inflicted by these lions on the local community and clarify whether compensation has been provided to the affected individuals. Number 3, state whether there are plans to involve local communities in conservation education programs aimed at raising awareness regarding coexistence with wildlife and the importance of timely reporting of such incidents to prevent further damages, injuries, and imminent fatalities. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, to outline any measures in place to mitigate human-wildlife conflicts nationwide to safeguard the safety of both the local communities and the wildlife. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Lominen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to pursuant to Standing Order 53-1. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee of Energy on the persistent power blackouts and electricity rationing in Lodwar and other major towns in Turkana County. Mr. Speaker, sir, despite being home to the Takwel Gorge Hydroelectric Power Station, which generates 106 megawatts of electricity, major towns in Turkana County remains unconnected to the national grid and continue to rely on diesel generators for power. Just last week, 2 key diesel generators failed in Lodwar, leading to severe electricity rationing, with residents now receiving power for only 4 hours a day. These has crippled businesses, forced government offices and non-governmental organizations to cease operations and cause widespread disruption of businesses. Towns like Loktang have been without power for months, with no solution in sight, while Lokori and Lokchogyo face similar challenges. The economic impact is devastating, and essential services such as health care and education have been severely affected. In this statement, Mr. Speaker, protect the noises from behind.
Senator Shakila and Senator Abdul Haji.
Thank you, sir.
Kindly let the Honorable Senator for Turkana be heard in silence, please.
Thank you, sir. In the statement, the committee should, 1, state steps being taken to connect Turkana major towns, including Lodwar, Lokori, Kalokol, Kakuma, and Lokchogyo, to the national power grid. 2, ascertain the progress made by the Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Corporation, REREC, in expanding electricity infrastructure in Turkana and determine the state of stalled projects that were meant to increase electrification in the county. 3, state any measures in place by Kenya Electricity Generating Company, KenGen, to facilitate power supply from Takwel Power Station to Turkana's towns, providing targeted intervention to alleviate the current power crisis. And finally, state long-term plans in place to improve Turkana electricity infrastructure to ensure reliable, sustainable, and affordable energy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I have another.
Proceed to read their 3 statements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a statement failure of flood control measures on River Kawalase. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on National Security, Defense, and Foreign Relations regarding the failure by both county and national government to manage the flood control project on River Kawalase in Turkana County, leading to the significant damage to property and displacement of residents in several villages. Mr. Speaker, sir, despite significant funds allocated by National Water Harvesting and Storage Authority for the project, which was initiated in 2021, recent heavy rains have caused the failure of the gabions and other flood control measures, resulting in widespread devastation in Loda Town and nearby villages, including Ngitakito, Line Moja, Nabute, Natabusio, Lokaparaparai, and Kawalase. The failure of these structures has severely affected over 360 households, displaced families, and caused significant property loss. In the statement, the committee should, 1, determine the cause of failure of flood control project on River Kawalase, stating reasons for such failure, and recommend measures to all accountable those responsible for negligence or malpractice noted. 2, state steps being taken to provide immediate support and compensation to the affected families, including resettlement assistance to safer grounds. And 3, outline any long-term flood management strategies the county and national government have put in place aimed at reassessing and reinforcing the current flood control structures to prevent failure, flooding incidents, and disasters. Final statement, Mr. Speaker, sir. This is a statement on the health and environmental impact of exploration of oil and natural gas well drilling in Turkana County. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Land, Environment, and Natural Resources regarding the health and environmental impacts of the exploratory oil and natural gas well drilling by Talo, Kenya BP in Block 10BB, 13T, and 10BA in South Lockyer Basin, Turkana County. Mr. Speaker, sir, communities living near the drilling sites have expressed serious concerns regarding water contamination and environmental degradation caused by hazardous waste from the drilling activities, which have already resulted in death of numerous livestock and poses significant risks to human health. This is despite the environmental impact assessment reports for the said projects outlining precautionary measures to be put in place to minimize any environmental impacts. Therefore, I request the committee to, 1, explain the waste management protocols put in place by Talo Kenya BV to prevent hazardous waste from contaminating water sources, soil, and air around drilling sites, especially in Block 10BB, 13T, 10BA in South Lockyer Basin, Turkana County, clarifying whether these protocols were contained in the EIA reports relating to the projects and whether they are strictly adhered to. 2, disclose the findings of environmental monitoring assessment conducted in blocks 10BB, 13T, and 10BA from 2019 to date, outlining any specific remedial action taken in response to those findings. 3, outline steps taken by Talo Kenya BV to reverse the environmental damage caused by hazardous waste from its activities, particularly in Lomokamar and Kangolemongin areas in Turkana County, and to prevent further damage. And finally, state whether Talo Kenya BV has compensated individuals who have lost their livestock and suffered other damages as a result of its activity. Thank you, sir.
Senator Professor Tom Agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a number of statements. The first statement is on increased insecurity in Kisumu County. I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on National Security, Defense and Foreign Relations regarding the increased cases of insecurity in Kisumu County. Mr. Speaker, there has been an upsurge of insecurity in Kisumu County, driven by various factors such as inadequate street lighting, rising urban poverty, especially in formal settlements like Manyata, Obunga, Nyalenda, and Nyawita, amongst others, which suffer from poor infrastructure and inadequate services. In the statement, the committee should state the measures that the county government has put in place to strengthen community policing as provided for in Section 96 of the National Police Service Act, particularly in informal settlements where insecurity is rampant. 2, provide timelines for the installation of street lights in high crime areas and indicate how the county government will ensure that street lights remain operational at all times. 3rd, outline the measures in place to ensure that the county government upgrades security infrastructure, such as the installation of closed-circuit television, CCTV, cameras in critical areas, and improve police response. And lastly, provide details of any collaborations the county government has undertaken with the national security agencies to address the rising crime and how Kisumu County is leveraging national security resources to address the issue comprehensively. Mr. Speaker, sir, my second statement is on pending bills in Kisumu County. I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget regarding the accumulation of pending bills in Kisumu County. The delayed payments have severely affected contractors and suppliers, and many have been forced to close down, relocate, or face financial ruin. This has stifled the local economy, Mr. Speaker, sir, as capital remains locked in unpaid government debts, reducing overall business activity in the region. In the statement, the committee should state the total pending bills owed by Kisumu County for the financial years 2024-2025, breaking down the bills by categories under development and recurrent expenditure. Secondly, disclose the measures the county government has implemented to settle these bills and state the criteria in place for settling bills owed to contractors and service providers. Thirdly, detail how the delay in settling pending bills has affected service delivery and the completion of ongoing projects, outlining affected projects and services. 4, list pending bills under dispute or subject to audit queries, explaining how the county plans to address these issues. And lastly, state the role of the National Treasury in supporting the county's efforts in addressing the pending bills. Mr. Speaker, sir, my third statement is on the utilization of county emergency funds by the Kisumu County government. I rise under Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget regarding the utilization of emergency funds by the Kisumu County government. Mr. Speaker, Section 110(1) of the Public Finance Management Act provides that a county government executive committee may establish a county government emergency fund which shall consist of monies from time to time appropriated to the county assembly to fund by an appropriation law. Further, Section 110(2) of PFM provides that the purpose of the emergency fund is to enable payments to be made in respect of a county when an urgent and unforeseen need for expenditure for which there is no specific legislative authority arises. In the statement, Mr. Speaker, the committee should 1, state the total amount of money allocated to the Kisumu County Emergency Fund since its inception and specify the criteria used to determine these allocations. 2, provide details on how the funds have been utilized to address various emergencies, indicating total amount spent on each. 3, confirm whether any grants or donations have been made to this fund by external partners or donors, and if so, state the amounts and how they've been utilized. 4, provide a list of companies and entities that have benefited from the fund through tenders, including information of their ownership, and establish whether the tenders were awarded competitively. And lastly, state measures in place to ensure the fund is used exclusively for its intended purpose, to guarantee accountability of its use. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, sir, I have a statement on the delays in salary payments and non-remittance of statutory deductions in Kisumu County. Mr. Speaker, I rise under Order 53 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Labor and Social Welfare concerning chronic delays in the payment of salaries, non-remittance of statutory deductions, and poor working conditions of staff by the county government of Kisumu. Apart from Kisumu County receiving disbursement of the National Treasury, the county also collects its own source revenue, OSR, that can be used to offset costs such as salaries and statutory deductions. Given the importance of having a motivated and a fully functional human resource, it is absurd, Mr. Speaker, that the county government of Kisumu has not prioritized these payments and is seemingly neglecting its financial responsibilities. Such malfeasance from the county government has led to a demotivated workforce, with employees undergoing a lot of frustrations pegged to payments of house rents, school fees, food for their families, defaulting on loan payments, and some being heavily penalized by banks, while others have been blacklisted with the Credit Reference Bureau, CRB, as a result of non-payment of salaries. In the statement, Mr. Speaker, the committee should explain the measures that the county has taken to address the chronic delays in payment of salaries, the remittance of statutory deductions, and poor working conditions, exacerbated by lack of appropriate tools and resources of county government staff in contravention of Article 41 of the Constitution and Section 19 of the Employment Act. 2, provide details of on-source revenue, OSR, the Kisumu County has collected over the past 3 financial years, and explain why this revenue has not been used to defray certain statutory deductions and other personal loan deductions promptly, despite the provisions of PFMA and Section 60 of County Government Act 2012. Outline the measures put in place by the county government to prevent further delays in salary payments and ensure timely remittance of statutory deductions, even when the national disbursement of treasury are delayed. And lastly, state whether the county has considered the legal implications of non-compliance with Sections 18 and 19.5 of the Employment Act 2007, especially regarding delays in salary payments and failure to remit statutory deductions, and explain any measures it has put in place to address such implications. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next order. Yes, Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I was beginning to get worried, and this is the season of, by way of, you cease to be. This is my statement for the week, pursuant to Standing Order number 57.1, Mr. Speaker. I want to present to the House the business of the week that commences Monday, the 14th. As colleagues, senators, you are aware, at the sitting of the Senate held yesterday, Tuesday, 8th of October, 2024, the Speaker communicated by way of message a resolution of the County Assembly of Kericho on the proposed removal from office by impeachment of Honorable Dr. Eric Mutahi, Governor of Kericho County, following the defeat of a motion for the establishment of a special committee pursuant to Section 33(3)(b) of the County Governments Act and Standing Order number 81B1 of the Senate. The Speaker gave directions that the hearing of the proposed removal from office by impeachment of the Governor of Kericho will be held in plenary on Monday 14th and Tuesday 15th of October 2024. So senators, please do note so that you don't return to Nairobi on Tuesday and you miss certain things. Accordingly, an order paper in this regard will be issued by the clerk of the Senate to facilitate the hearing, together with the timetable and the program of activities. Similarly, honorable senators, you will recall that this morning, the Speaker of the Senate also communicated by way of a message a resolution of the National Assembly on the proposed removal from office by impeachment of His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. Following the defeat of a motion for the establishment of a special committee pursuant to Article 145(3)(b) of the Constitution, the Speaker gave directions that the hearing of the proposed removal from office by impeachment of Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya will be held in plenary on Wednesday the 16th October, Thursday 17th October. Remember, you further gave clarifications, Mr. Speaker, that should there be need to extend beyond the 2 days after realization of the bundle of documents that we have to interact with, you will give further guidance, Mr. Speaker, and therefore we await your guidance. This will be an extremely busy week. Consequently, actually, a procedural motion for the alteration of the calendar and the meeting dates and times for Wednesday 16th October and Thursday 17th October has been listed in the order paper at order number 8, the next order which we are just about to consider, to allow for the hearing to be taken within the stipulated times. We have, Mr. Speaker, out of the abundance of caution as well, ensured that the way the motion is drafted is that we will not leave this chamber until we conclude the business listed on that particular day. And those who have been here long enough know that there's nothing unusual. In an impeachment process, there are times we've left here even as late as 3 a.m. It happens, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we are providing the procedural motion in the way and format that it did, so that we don't run into the kind of challenges that we did the last time we had an impeachment motion, Mr. Speaker. So it'll be an extremely busy 4 days. First time in the history that as Senate we are considering 2 impeachments in 1 week. Very consequential week for the Senate and the Republic of Kenya, for the people of Kericho, as well as for the people of the Republic of Kenya. So I had earlier, Mr. Speaker, mentioned, and it appeared like a joke, but I want to reiterate for my colleagues that you be cautious even in your weekend endeavors, Mr. Speaker, because there's a lot before us, and you never know
Majority Leader, can you stick to your statement?
It is in my statement, Mr. Speaker. I'm reading it off.
Are you questioning the chair?
Not the chair. Mr. Speaker, it is in my statement that even Senator Hezena needs to be careful where she goes this weekend, Mr. Speaker. At its meeting, Mr. Speaker, held on Tuesday, 8th October, the SBC approved the next set of questions to be scheduled in the order paper for Wednesday, 16th October. However, given our schedule for the aforementioned hearings, we will reschedule the questions to Wednesday, 23rd of October, 2024. And the summary of those questions is, there are questions to the CS of Energy by Dr. Uhuru Odinga, and to the same CS by Senator Shakila Abdallah, and to the CS for Interior by Senator James Burango, and the CS for Interior, another question by Senator Daniel Maanzo. There is a question also to that CS, Cabinet Secretary for Interior, question number 79 by Joe Nyotu. A question to the CS for Interior also by Senator Agnes Kavindu, question number 84. A further question to the CS for Energy and Petroleum by Senator Recha Murgor. Then a further question to the CS for Interior by Senator Kathuri Murungi. A further question to CS Interior by Senator Professor Ujenda. 2 questions actually. And a further question by Senator Murango to the CS for Interior. Further 2 questions. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, those questions shall be considered on Wednesday, the 23rd of October. With those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay this statement on the table of the Senate. I thank you.
Next order.
Order number 8, procedural motion. Alteration of the hours of meeting for Wednesday, 16th October 2024 and Thursday, 17th October 2024.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move a motion. This motion, procedural motion, alternation of the hours of meeting for Wednesday, 16th Wednesday 2024, and Thursday, 17th October 2024. That notwithstanding the resolutions of the Senate made pursuant to Standing Order 32 on 15th February 2024, 26th June 2024, 19th August 2024, and 17th September 2024 on the approval of the Senate calendar, regular sessions for the third session 2024, the Senate resolves, pursuant to Standing Order 34-4B, and notwithstanding the provisions of Standing Order 34-1, to commence its sitting for Wednesday, 16th October 2024, morning sitting at 9 a.m. Pursuant in Standing Order 34-4B, to hold a sitting on Thursday, 17th October 2024, starting at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and pursuant to Standing Order 34-4A, to extend its sitting time for Wednesday, 16th October 2024 and Thursday, 17th October 2024 afternoon sittings until conclusion of business listed in the order papers of the day, of that day. Sub 103, Wednesday, October 09, 2024, afternoon sitting, 1962. In order to investigate the purpose removal from the office by impeachment of His Excellency Gachagua, EGH, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to request Senator, the Minority Leader, Senator Mazayo, to second.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I second.
Honorable Senators, I'll proceed to propose the question, which is that notwithstanding the resolution of the Senate made pursuant to Standing Order 32 on the 15th of February 2024, 26th June 2024, 19th August 2024, and 17th September 2024 on the approval of the Senate calendar regular sessions for the third session 2024, the Senate resolves the following. Pursuant to Standing Order 34-4B, and notwithstanding the provisions of Standing Order 34-1, to commence its sittings for Wednesday, the 16th of October 2024, morning sitting at 9 a.m. 2, pursuant to Standing Order 34-4B, to hold a sitting on Thursday, the 17th of October 2024, starting at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And 3, pursuant to Standing Order 34-4A, to extend its sitting time for Wednesday, the 16th of October 2024, and Thursday, 17th October 2024, afternoon sittings until conclusion of business listed in the order paper for the day, in order to investigate the proposed removal from office by impeachment of His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua, EGH, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. Now, the floor is open. This is a procedural motion. With your concurrence, you may allow me to put the question. The voting is by voice, so that we dispense with this motion immediately. Very well. I will now proceed to put the question. That notwithstanding the resolutions of the Senate made pursuant to Standing Order 32 on the 15th February 2024, 26th June 2024, 19th August 2024, and 17th September 2024, on the approval of the Senate calendar regular sessions for the third session 2024, the Senate resolves as follows. 1. Pursuant to Standing Order 34.4b, and notwithstanding the provisions of Standing Order 34.1, to commence its sittings for Wednesday, 16th of October 2024, morning sitting at 9 a.m. 2. Pursuant to Standing Order 34.4b, to hold a sitting on Thursday, 17th of October 2024, starting at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And 3, pursuant to Standing Order 34.4a, to extend its sitting time for Wednesday, 16th of October 2024, and Thursday, 17th October 2024, afternoon sittings until conclusion of business listed in the order paper of the day, in order to investigate the proposed removal from office by impeachment of His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua, EGH, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Now, honorable senators, this resolution you just passed will have meaning if by 9 we have quorum in the chamber. There will be no point of passing such a resolution and then the bell rings for 10 minutes, another 10 minutes, then we start at 9:30. That is the regular time we always start. So let this resolution then make us be in the chamber at 9, so that we don't have to ring the quorum bell. If we do that, I believe the 2 days will be adequate to cover the hearing on this particular matter. Next order, please. Now, honorable members, for the convenience of the House, allow me to invoke Standing Order 45 to rearrange the sequence of today's order paper, and we move to prosecute order number 18, and thereafter resume the normal flow as contained in today's order paper. Clerk, proceed to call that order.
Order number 18, the Election Offences Amendment number 2 Bill, Senate Bills number 28 of 2024. Second reading.
Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Election Offences Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 28 of 2024, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this is third in the series of the so-called NADCO bills, and I have reminded colleague senators many times that we must remain true to our call. Mr. Speaker, we had a very difficult time as a country in 2023, and when we went to the NADCO negotiations, there are many things that we agreed. Senator Okongo Omogeni, from the minority side, represented his side of the Azimio side, and I want to believe he will have a thing or two to say as he seconds this bill, actually, Mr. Speaker, because he was part of the deliberations. He knows very well the presentations and the submissions that Kenyans made to us for, I think it was close to a month at the Bomas of Kenya, where citizens felt that there are certain things that were not right in this country, and they wanted us to address the same. Therefore, we came up with about 9 bills, 3 of which we have since dispensed with as a House. We have 6 more, including a constitutional amendment bill, Mr. Speaker, that is before the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. And I don't see the chair here right now, but last week at the SPC, he had promised us that very soon JLAC will be bringing a report actually to this House, Mr. Speaker, on what do we think of the constitutional amendment bill that was produced by the NADCO team. There are very interesting provisions there, including for the Senate. I have since seen our colleague, actually, Senator Cherargei, I don't know, he's not here, has done another constitutional amendment bill. Some of the provisions are actually borrowed from the NADCO bill, and that's a conversation that we are going to have. But today's bill, the Elections Offences Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 28 of 2024, Mr. Speaker, is a bill whose principal object is to amend actually Section 6 of the Election Offences Act of 2016, a bill that we passed in this House about 8 years ago, Mr. Speaker. And there was very interesting debate actually at that particular time. If you have seen some of the snippets from the debates and the things that were said at that particular time, Mr. Speaker, it was during the passage of some of this legislation. Some of the very interesting old videos of the Senate you will see. It was a very heated exchange in this House. You know, one of the things I have challenged the clerk, Mr. Speaker, to do is to come up with a digital library. The generation of Senator Odi Okech does not believe anymore in ink and paper, but they are more keen on listening and watching. Therefore, it's important we keep a video library so that, and make it digitally available, so that when Senator Eddie or Senator Ezena takes a break from their maneuvers on TikTok, they can listen into debates that were done 5-10 years ago, and that will interest them. I would have included Senator Methu in that list, Mr. Speaker, but given his latest looks, I don't think he qualifies to be with his age mates in that particular regard, Mr. Speaker. But he's young at heart. I'm not sure about that face, Mr. Speaker. So in 2016, when this Election Offences Act was passed actually in this House, like I have observed, it was a very heated debate because we kept on reminding each other one of the cardinal rules of lawmaking. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it was the first time I heard these words by then Senator for Bungoma and now the Speaker of the National Assembly, that as you pass laws, please think of that law in the hand of your worst enemy and you on the receiving end of that particular piece of legislation. because many times we pass law here, and you imagine that because maybe I'm a legislator, I can easily get away with these things. But you never know. You will not be a legislator for life. You will not be in power forever. There are days you will be an ordinary citizen, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it's important that as we pass legislation, that was a obtaining theme at that particular time, Mr. Speaker, that because as political leaders, we are actually practitioners in the political space, as we pass the electoral offences law, it was important that we remind ourselves that what obtains at that particular time may not be necessarily true. And we've seen the topsy-turvy of our politics, Mr. Speaker, that the people who you necessarily don't greet today may be your best friends tomorrow. Many people are getting to learn that in this particular session. But, Mr. Speaker, you know for a fact that those who've been around for a while know that that is a norm of politics. Therefore, the bill, Madam Speaker, I do note the change, has two clauses, Clause 1 and Clause 2. It's a very straightforward bill. And I know, Senator Okongo, you remember quite well why we had to distinguish from the other elections amendment. We wanted to speak specifically to offenses, and that's why we kept it separate to the other bill. Clause 1 is a short title of the bill, and Clause 2 provides that it shall be an offense for members of and staff of the IEBC to conduct or hold an election in an ungazetted polling station. You remember the very big dispute we had in the 2017 petition, Raila Odinga versus Uhuru Kenyatta, about ungazetted polling stations and the debate about it. And it was at that time that we insisted, actually, Mr. Speaker, on the need for an entire gazettement of polling stations and it being prominently displayed. Further, the clause creates offenses for members of staff of commission who unreasonably delay in declaring election results or knowingly alter declared election results. You know the dispute that we've had. And there's a history to this. Those that have seen the sunshine more times than I, like Senator Oburu, Mr. Speaker, will tell you the journey that the country has traveled, that it was not unusual back in the day, in the days of Kanum Lolongo system, Mr. Speaker. Legend has it. For me, it's legend. For people like Senator Oburu, this is the kind of life that they live through, Mr. Speaker, that you will go to an election and you know the way they conducted elections that time. If it's Senator so-and-so, your agent will hold your picture and people will queue behind. And many times, because the returning officer was the district commissioner, Mr. Speaker, they would declare the result that the powers that be wanted. And it didn't matter how many people you had on your queue. Many are the times that we hear the short queue was declared to be the longer, and the longer, the shorter, Madam Speaker. With the advent of the new constitution, while we thought we had slayed the dragon of electoral malpractices, Madam Speaker, that ghost has refused to die. And it's not unusual to find that after an election, you find an election official, Madam Speaker, take inordinately long before making a declaration, despite the fact that all results have come in, all polling stations have been declared, but for one reason or the other, they're just taking long in making a declaration. In fact, there are many elections, actually, Madam Speaker, that in the last 1 or 2 elections, you find that the results were declared days after. And there was no justifiable reason why the same cannot be done. I look forward to a time, Madam Speaker, where we will be living in a country where elections can be held in the morning, the results are declared in the evening, and the following day, people are back to work like nothing happened. Because there are more mature democracies that have such practices, and people believe and trust the electoral systems, Madam Speaker. And part of achieving that level of belief in our electoral system and conduct, Madam Speaker, include tightening the noose with provisions such as what is provided in this particular bill, Madam Speaker. Because when an electoral official alters the results for whatever reason, either they have been induced or they don't like the candidate that has won, it must be punishable. And the punishment must be punitive, Madam Speaker, so that the will of the people is always respected, so that we don't have people kill each other, so that we don't have people feel like it doesn't matter how you vote, that it is them that count that matter. I don't think that is what Kenyans wanted when they queued up on the 27th of August in 2010 and bequeathed themselves the new constitution. Therefore, that's part of the amendment. The provision set out under Clause 2 is crucial, Madam Speaker, because it helps in upholding the credibility of our electoral processes by specifying that only designated polling stations may be used to conduct or hold an election, and will not only help prevent potential manipulation or irregularities, but will also fortify democratic principles of free and fair elections, ultimately fostering public trust in the electoral systems, Madam Speaker. Ultimately, Madam Speaker, if you also tamper with election outcome that is likely to undermine the will of the people and erode the legitimacy of democratically elected leaders, Madam Speaker, then there is an imposition of the offense, Madam Speaker, so that we ensure that such electoral officials are punished, Madam Speaker, and we ensure that people trust that the people that are in office were legitimately elected. Therefore, Madam Speaker, this is just a cleanup. Like I had told you, you remember, Madam Speaker, this was still at the time where there were disputes about how elections were carried out, who made a declaration here or there, whether it was rightfully done or not, Madam Speaker. Therefore, I really believe, Madam Speaker, that this is an extremely important piece of legislation, which I want colleague senators to support so that we can conclude on this conversation and ensure that we tighten the noose in terms of belief in our electoral processes, Madam Speaker. I wish to state that the integrity of the electoral process is fundamental to the proper functioning of a democratic society, and therefore I urge senators to support this bill and make any further addition. But remember, there is a cardinal rule that we agreed on how we are going to treat these so-called NADCO bills, Madam Speaker, that even by amendments, they have to be negotiated in a bipartisan way, that you need the nod of yours truly and Senator Stewart Maza and the team that he leads to concur, because there's a long, rigorous way which we arrived at these bills, and Senator Okongo Mogeni knows that we worked long and hard deep into the night sometimes to agree on some of these provisions. But nonetheless, as a legislature, we have the full authority and the final say in terms of any piece of legislation that takes the full force of law. We are the final body. Therefore, it is not to gag members in any way, but just to remind them of a cardinal principle that a good turn deserves another. And when you reach an agreement, it's always important to honor it. Therefore, Madam Speaker, with those many remarks, I beg to move and request my colleague who served with me in the NADCO team, the Senator for Nyamira, Senator Okongo Omogeni, Senior Counsel, to second. I thank you.
Senator Mogeni.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to second this very important bill that is trying to strengthen the way we deal with those people who want to manipulate elections. Madam Speaker, when we sat at the NADCO team, it was very clear that the intention of the people of Kenya is that we should have free, fair elections that are not manipulated either by the candidates or by the members of staff of IEBC. And Mr. Speaker, Kenyans also want those who are tasked with the running of our elections to take full responsibility for any manipulation or any interference in either the counting or the tallying of votes that are received by candidates. That's the only way, Madam Speaker, we can ensure that elections should truly reflect the free will of the people. Madam Speaker, there are many countries, many jurisdictions where elections are closed and the results are known almost at the close of the hour. I was privileged, I believe in 2020, I may not remember, between 2020 and 2021, I was invited by the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Madam Patricia Scotland, to be an observer on behalf of Kenya in the Bahamas. And Madam Speaker, the elections in Bahamas closed at 6 p.m. By the time we were going back to our respective hotels at 9 o'clock, the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister who was taking over from the outgoing Prime Minister, was on TV. Within a record 4 hours, Madam Speaker, the results were out. But in Kenya, you'd be lucky, Madam Speaker, to know your presidential candidate within 48 hours. You'll be very lucky. So it's this idea of keeping people in anxiety and also waiting restless in our tallying centers is not fair. Madam Speaker, I have my own personal experience. Elections are conducted on a Tuesday, Madam Speaker, and you will never be handed a certificate to come back to Nairobi as a member of parliament or a senator till the third day. And there's this fear among candidates that if you get out of a polling station, your results will be altered and the certificates of a winner can be given to another. It is inhuman, Madam Speaker. It is totally inhuman, Madam Speaker. You stay the first night in a tallying center the whole night. You stay the following day. You get your results, so your certificate the third day, Madam Speaker. We cannot justify why we should be treated to such inhumane treatment by the officials running our elections. Madam Speaker, with the technology, with enhanced staff for IEBC, we should know our results in real time. And what makes it worse, Madam Speaker, we're among few countries in the world where we do 6 elections in one. So you have to wait for the counting of the presidential results and the tallying, go to governor, go to senator, go to member of parliament, women rep, and finally to MCA. And Madam Speaker, it's now going to be worse because we also made proposals to allow the presidential elections to be counted, tallied first. And you can imagine how contentious presidential results can be. So if we don't create this offense of unreasonably delaying results, people can wait even up to 4 days. So these are very progressive proposal, Madam Speaker, and we want to challenge when we recruit new commissioners to IEBC, this should be top on the agenda, Madam Speaker. Even down here in Lusaka, when Akainde Ichilema was being elected president, we were in Zambia as observers. I was there with the Speaker then, Ken Lusaka, Madam Speaker. And I was pleasantly surprised that their results are released in a much quicker time than in Kenya, Madam Speaker. So I urge colleagues to support this very progressive amendment. This is actually for our own good as politicians, as people who run in elections. Senator Kalwale, you know how long it takes for you to get your results as a senator. I'm sure nobody here gets his results on the same night when the voting comes to a close. You'll be lucky to get them the following 2 nights. I don't know what the experience from Nakuru, but it takes a very, very long time. And Kenyans who appeared before us and Nadiko were not impressed at all. The aspiration and the wish of Kenyans is that this should be done in really time. The other offense, Madam Speaker, that we are trying to address is alteration of results. Madam Speaker, I was privileged to handle the Raila Odinga election petition in 2013. And there is this defense that election officials will always put in their responses. They will tell you that this was an intentional mistake in, how do we call it, transmitting results from Form A to B, where you will find that a candidate in Form A may have scored 200, but when you go to Form B, when tallying is happening, the results will be exchanged with another candidate. And when the officials come to court, they will say that this was an intentional mistake, not deliberate, but an intentional. But you can't joke, Madam Speaker, with somebody's votes. If I've garnered 400 votes at the polling station, I expect the same votes to be protected, preserved to the tallying center, maybe for member of parliament or for a senatorial candidate. So this offense, Madam Speaker, is going to make it punitive for any official working with IEBC to make any alteration. The results that you announce in Form A, Madam Speaker, must be reflected in Form B and Form C. It will no longer be an excuse to tell us that the mistake was not deliberate, it was unintentional. No. If you don't transmit the results as they were declared or announced at the polling station, this proposed amendment is making it an offense, Madam Speaker. We have seen it in many elections. In 2013, Madam Speaker, I represented Honorable Richard Tongi in an election petition for Nyaribari against Honorable Chris Bichagi. And Madam Speaker, the contention in that election was from one polling station called Bobaracho, where there was a lot of manipulation on the results that were garnered at the polling station and as transmitted to the tallying center. And when we argued in court, there are two versions. The one that was declared at the polling station and the one that was declared at the tallying center. The interesting aspect in that case, Madam Speaker, was that if you were to rely on the results that were declared at the polling station, Honorable Richard Tongi was to be the winner. If you took the one that was declared at the tallying center, Honorable Chris Bichagi was to be the winner. You can imagine that kind of doubt that you create as to who really is a winner in this contest. And the judge had no option other than to rule that because of the doubt that was created as to the votes that were garnered by the two candidates from that polling station that was materially affecting the outcome of the election, he had no choice other than to nullify that election, simply because of a mistake of a scrupulous official from IEBC. And the tragedy is this: no criminal sanctions were taken against the officer who was involved. So this proposed amendment is now going to make it an offense, Madam Speaker, for anybody who makes any alteration, either deliberate or undeliberate, on the outcome of any results. This is the only way, Madam Speaker, as a country, we can make the lucky Kenyans who have been tasked to managing our electoral processes in this country, so that we be a country that conducts elections that have integrity, Madam Speaker, elections that will truly reflect the will of the people, elections that will not be easy to impeach or to overturn in an election petition, because we waste a lot of time as a country going to court then the electoral court overturns an election, and you go back to the people. It's very expensive to the candidates, it's expensive to the country, and does not leave a lot of credibility on our elections. So finally, is this offense of conducting elections in ungazetted polling stations. Very contentious issue during the Raila Odinga versus Uhuru Kenyatta elections, where it was alleged, Madam Speaker, that in several areas, in some parts of this country, including northeastern Kenya, the electoral officials decided to convert, I don't know whether to say to convert or to create. They just started to create polling stations and say we were trying to take care of nomads. But you see, the law is very clear, Madam Speaker. It says a polling station must be gazetted. Honorable Galwale, you know that. A polling station must clearly be gazetted. So this particular amendment is making it a serious offense for any electoral official to conduct elections in ungazetted polling stations. Madam Speaker, if we have gazetted Girigiri Primary School as the polling station for Samaro Ward in West Mogirango, nobody has got powers to move that polling station, for example, to Tinga Market. It must be at that polling station. Whether we are pastoralists or farmers, there need to be certainty as to where a vote will be cast. Because you have observers, Madam Speaker, who must know where they are going to be stationed and observe the elections. You have the officials who are delivering electoral materials. They must know with certainty where they will deliver those materials. Some are drove from choppers, etc. So this again is making it clear that our polling stations must be known. There must be certainty. There should not be any doubt as to where one will vote. Madam Speaker, I've done so many election petitions. I was the first lawyer to petition the Supreme Court successfully in the case of Peter Gaderau Munya versus Kilemi Mwiria, and the issues we are addressing here featured very prominently, all the way from the High Court, Court of Appeal, all the way to the Supreme Court. And I remember Kilemi Mwiria questioning why a polling station that was closest to the tallying center was the last one to deliver election results. Because of the same thing we are trying to cure here, unreasonable delay. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill. This was a bipartisan bill. We took views from Kenyans. This bill was not meant to serve either the UDA coalition or the Azimio coalition. It's an attempt to do some cleanup on around how we conduct our elections, to make it more efficient, to build trust from Kenyans, and to ensure that the will of the people is truly reflected in our elections. With those many remarks, Madam Speaker, I beg to second. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, I propose the question that the Election Offences Amendment Bill number 2, Senate Bills number 28 of 2024 be now read a second time. Senator Khalwale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to speak in support of this amendment. And Madam Speaker, I do so with nostalgia because I remember that as stated in the statement of objects and reasons on the memorandum of this bill, the principal object of this bill is to amend Section 6 of the Election Act, Offences Act of 2016. Why with nostalgia? Is because, Mr. Speaker, I remember this act when we enacted it, it was the industry of a joint committee of both the Senate and the National Assembly in 2016. And I sat on that committee, Madam Speaker. I remember we pitched in a hotel for almost 2 weeks. Our chairs were Honorable James Orengo and Kreitu Murungi. Those were the co-chairs. And we did a very good job. That it has served us well, but again exposed the need for us to make further amendments, carries true.
Order, Honorable Senator Tobiko and team, can you consult in law notes, please? Tones, please.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Carries true what the late former Vice President of Kenya, Michael Kijana Wamalwa, told the country, namely, that even in the best of ideas, there's always time and room for those ideas to yield ground to better ideas. I therefore support these amendments and want to insist that never should we allow the outcome of the election, of any election in this country, Madam Speaker, to be decided by the people who count votes and announce the results. The outcome must be decided by the people who vote. And Madam Speaker, I can speak with a degree of authority. I was looking at the book by the Honorable Millie Odhiambo, yes, about rigging or being rigged out. And in a way I was thinking about myself because I have gone through it all. I remember I won an election fairly and squarely in 2007. And because of lack of this kind of scrutiny, I was returned to a by-election. And the grounds, Madam Speaker, were that a brother of my opponent sat in a corner in a polling station, and he was recording what he thought was the result. And IEBC was doing its work. So when we went to court, I was accused, IEBC was co-accused, well, not really accused, but I was a respondent and they were co-respondents. The court just decided to agree with the guy who was taking some funny notes in a corner. And I was returned to an election. I remember Dr. Uhuru Odinga and the former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, and his deputy, Musalia Mudavadi, and Minister then Oparanya, and Minister then Otuoma, and Minister then Ababu, and Minister then Anyang' Nyong. They all converged in Ekolomani just to teach me a lesson. And it was very exciting that when we defeated them, we now widened the margin. So these things, we have to continue tightening them. But then what a shame. I have seen elections in Ghana, Madam Speaker. I don't know, you are very experienced in these things. I've seen elections in Ghana. And you see an elections official carrying results on their heads in a carton, going to some central place where they return the things, and nothing happens to them, and people believe in the outcome. What is wrong with our country? That even with this act that we made in 2016, we still must tighten and tighten and tighten even further. There is something wrong about our very integrity as individuals who conduct elections, as individuals who present our names as candidates. We do not believe in anything. So much so that Madam Speaker, I'm yet to meet a single person who lost an election who says that I lost an election. They always say, Madam Speaker, quote unquote, kura yangu iliibiwa. I've never understood. And therefore, Madam Speaker, the amendments must ensure that as the courts decided that the election ends at the polling station, I want to support this because this is a march towards tightening that ending to truly end at polling stations. What do I mean, Madam Speaker? Most of the polling stations, IEBC has structured them so that around about 500 people vote at a stream, presided over by a presiding officer. So how it comes to pass in this country that counting 500 votes can take 2-3 days, I've never understood. I've even done an exercise, Madam Speaker, of supposing I was a presiding officer and there are 3 candidates and they have all benefited from these 500 voters. And you say, hold this for candidate 1, candidate 2, candidate 3. The process of dishing out, this one got this, this one got this, this one got this, should not take more than 30 minutes. And then the actual counting should not take more than 5 minutes, because to count from 1 up to 500, you don't need hours. So you'll find, Madam Speaker, this counting has been done, and the election officials in the polling station, they'll keep on sitting there, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. By that time, all agents have become fatigued, they are asleep, and now the people who count the votes start deciding the outcome. I think I want to find a way, innovative, whereby we can demand, where we, by law, that announcement by our presiding officers should be within a particular time frame. At the county election, Madam Speaker, I normally get my results after 4 days. 4 days. So when you ask the county returning officer, he tells you, I'm still tallying. They'll move from that point to this point. I remember when I lost my election, which was very surprising. It's very difficult for me to lose an election in Kakamega, and the speaker knows this. So when I lost the election in 2017, I was so surprised. So I decided to create my own IBC. In 2022, Madam Speaker, because I had created my own tallying center, full-fledged, within 8 hours after voting, I already knew the outcome of my election. But I had to wait for 4 days for the returning officer to say that I'm the winner. And this was with a lot of experience, Madam Speaker, whereby, and I believe Senator Eddie Kicheru has this experience also. He ran into similar turbulent clouds, Madam Speaker. When now the returning officer, and colleagues, you better take this as your own experience, put up your own tallying center. When they discover that you have got your own tallying center, they then respect you. Because for every polling station you have a result, for every constituency you have a result, they become cautious. I remember in Likuyani constituency, Madam Speaker, in 2022, a whooping 6,000 votes had been removed. So we just called the returning officer, we told him, look, even if you must steal, we know we have won. We can leave you these 6,000 votes and we shall still win. What do you do? So this law amendment is crucial. 6D speaks to the offense of willfully preventing any person from voting at the polling station at which they know or have reasonable cause to believe such a person is entitled to vote. This is a very common thing. Madam Speaker, if you go to a populous polling station like Khaega in Shinyalu, or Malinya in Ikolomani, or Muliro Gardens in Urambe, if you are very popular there, then what they do, you'll go, you'll find women there who don't know how to read and write, probably 10 of them, sometimes more. They are seated there, have been sitting there from 6. They've been told you're not going to vote for some strange reason. So this offense that has been put there is to put in check some presiding officers who become rogue. You talk to the police, they look this side. You talk to those kinds of things must be addressed. Madam Speaker, before I end, there was a very bad experience in Kakamega and in Mombasa in 2022, where an election was postponed by IEBC. The governor's election was just postponed. In Mombasa, in Kakamega, it was postponed. So, it could not make sense to us. How would you postpone an election? So people have gone to vote. They find the election is not taking place. And some people get so disgusted, they go back home without voting. And therefore that affects the other 5 elections, since you had only nullified. Shall I say nullified? No, you had postponed only one election. We should make it impossible for IEBC to postpone any election for any reason unless it is a question of a disaster. And if it is a disaster, Madam Speaker, how can a disaster affect only one election out of 6? If there is a storm, it should affect all the 6. So that brings my contribution to the end, but there's also this offense of a presiding officer or an official willfully rejecting or refusing to count any ballot paper which they know or have reasonable cause to believe is validly cast, or any candidate in accordance with the provisions of such a written law. This one, it is curing something which actually happens in every election. And Madam Speaker, I know you are going to be a candidate, not under affirmative action, but a straight candidate. You better take this one very seriously. The ballot is cost. And so it goes, Catherine Muma, Catherine Muma, Catherine Muma. Then the returning officer, the presiding officer, just refuses to admit that vote as being yours. Now, when you are new in the process, Madam Speaker, and you think you are winning, when they put aside 6, when they put aside 10, you don't take it seriously because you are excited. What you don't know, that if this thing is being repeated, like in Kakamega where I've got 2,000 polling stations, if they knock out 10 slowly like that, you're talking about losing 20,000 votes that had been cast in your favor. So I love this amendment, and I want to congratulate Senator Cheriot, and I think, Honorable Ichungwa, and His Excellency Kalonzo Musyoka, because, Madam Speaker, they were the ones who were the co-chairs for the national dialogue that has birthed these amendments. I support. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Faki.
Asante Bi Speaker kwa kunipa fursa hii pia kuchangia mswada wa marekebisho ya sheria ya makosa ya uchaguzi. Mheshimiwa Speaker, sheria hii na marekebisho haya yamekuja kupitia kwa ile kamati ya NADCO, National Dialogue Committee, ambayo hapa katika bunge letu la Senate iliwakilishwa na Senator Cheriot ambaye ni kiongozi wa wengi, na vile vile pia Commissioner Senator Okongo Mogeni ambaye alikuwa anawakilisha upande wa wachache. Mheshimiwa Speaker, ni muhimu kwamba sheria zetu za uchaguzi zipigwe msasa mara kwa mara, kwa sababu kuna mambo yanayoibuka katika uchaguzi ambayo mengine labda hayakuweza kuangaziwa katika sheria ilipoundwa. Kwa mfano, Mheshimiwa Speaker, swala la kuwa na vituo ghushi vya uchaguzi ambapo matokeo unaambiwa yanatoka katika kituo hichi, lakini katika orodha ya vituo ambavyo vimewekwa katika orodha rasmi ya gazeti havimo katika orodha hiyo. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Speaker, hii sheria itaharamisha vituo vyovyote ambavyo vyafanya uchaguzi wakati haviko katika gazeti rasmi ambalo limegusia na kutaja vituo ambavyo vitatumika katika masuala ya uchaguzi. Mheshimiwa Speaker, swala la pili ni swala la wale wanaosimamia uchaguzi. Na Mheshimiwa Speaker, kuna mabarobaro wawili hapa ambao wanacheka kwa sauti. Ningeomba wacheka kwa sauti za chini kwa sababu mzee anazungumza, kwa hivyo ni muhimu. Kwa Mheshimiwa Speaker, nasema kwa
Senators, please consult in low tones, Let's not disrupt.
Tunasema Mheshimiwa Speaker kwamba wale wanaosimamia uchaguzi pia sasa lazima sheria iwaangazie kwamba makosa wanayofanya, ukiukaji wa sheria unaofanyika katika wakati wa uchaguzi, Mheshimiwa Speaker, ni muhimu wale wanaohusika pia wapelekwe mahakamani na waweze kuhukumiwa kwa makosa kama hayo. Mheshimiwa Speaker, haiwezekani kwamba msimamizi wa uchaguzi akatae kuhesabu kura halali ambayo imepigwa na mwananchi wa Kenya. Mheshimiwa Speaker, haifai ama haiwezekani msimamizi wa uchaguzi atangaze mtu aliyeshindwa kuwa mshindi na asichukuliwe hatua yoyote na sheria. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Speaker, sheria hii itasaidia pia kuweza kuchukulia hatua ama kuwapeleka kwenye sheria wale ambao watapeleka matokeo ambao si sawa katika uchaguzi ambao utakuwa umefanyika katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Speaker, kwa hayo masuala mawili mimi naunga mkono marekebisho haya ya sheria ya uchaguzi ya makosa ya uchaguzi. Asante Mr. Speaker.
Senator Eddie. Order Senator Methu.
Senator Methu, thank you, Madam Speaker. I think that
Senator Nyutu and Senator Methu, please. You are not in a market, please.
Madam Speaker, I think Senator Methu seems to be very, very unsettled today.
Senator Eddie, please make your contribution.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a very important progress, Madam Speaker, from the NADCO conversations, and a beacon of hope in the country, because every year that we have gone into an election, we have come out more bruised as a nation than before we went to an election. And therefore, it is in order to congratulate the members of the NADCO committee, starting with the co-chairs that, midwifed the production of the documents that then led to inform the pieces of legislation that we're going to see in this House, especially with regards to elections, electoral processes, electoral bodies. And this is one of those, Madam Speaker. And I like to start right away by supporting this particular motion, Madam Speaker, because one of the issues that we face as a country is that the commissions that run election are actually above the law, in the sense that the offenses that commissioners do make sometimes are reduced to mere mistakes. However costly they are, Madam Speaker, to the country, they end up not getting held accountable in the eyes of the nation. Madam Speaker, in 2007, I was a very young man in Friends School Kamusinga, and as a Form 2 then, the chaos that we experienced in our election and the resultant death that we experienced, if you remember, Madam Speaker, there was this envelope that eventually went to in the International Criminal Court. And in that envelope, when eventually the names were revealed in that envelope, Madam Speaker, there were people from the police who were held accountable. And there were politicians who were held accountable. And there were public servants who were held accountable. But there was nobody from the commission then that was the referee that ran the election that were held accountable. Madam Speaker, fast forward 2013, when we had an election that was also contested. Even at appearing at the court, you find that the commissioners always escape scot-free from these problems. And therefore, it's very important that we support this bill. And the bill has attempted to look at those offenses by members and staffers of the commission. And I like the way they are very specific, to the extent that if you look, for instance, the issue of documentation of elections, that is under section 6A, subsection A. And it says that one of those offenses is if anybody makes in any record, return, or other document which they are required to keep or make under such written law an entry which they know or have reasonable cause to believe to be false or do not believe to be true. The documentation of an election, given the fact that this is one of the most radically looked at documentation. For instance, Madam Speaker, we know that forms of election, starting from Form A to Form B to Form C, that then is used to declare elections at a provincial level, and the other ones used at constituency levels, Madam Speaker, these are highly regarded forms that have got security features that are very clear. And Madam Speaker, we have seen a number of instances that those documents are doctored. And electoral officials have got so much power that that doctoring sometimes escapes the mind of the nation because of the bulkness that our elections are. You can imagine, Madam Speaker, that at a presidential level, we are dealing with over 46,000 polling stations. And those polling stations, Madam Speaker, sometimes if these things are not well documented, then we have a problem. And Madam Speaker, I don't want to belabor all the sections and all the offenses that have been listed here, but I wanted to make 3 quick comments. That, Madam Speaker, I think that I will be submitting a number of amendments on this bill, because it is one thing to look at offenses committed during the running of an election. But I think that the biggest offenses that we can face as a country are offenses through the entire process of an election. If you remember 2017 election that was cancelled by, or nullified by the court, it was nullified based on the process of the election. And Madam Speaker, in my humble view, this bill seeks to sort 3 things, but it also leaves 3 things that I want to talk about. Number 1, this bill seeks to solve unreasonable delays and unreasonable doctoring of election results. I think that is well captured in this Section 6 amendment. From, if you read all the way from A to M, it is well captured. Number two, it also seeks to sort the alteration of results. If I were to summarize what I'm seeing from this bill, which is why I'm supporting it. And number three, it can essentially help us to correct ungazetted polling stations, which sometimes have also featured in a number of our election results, that you end up having some ghost polling stations, like what happened in Migori County, Madam Speaker, in the 2017 election. If you follow that nullification, Madam Speaker, there were variably so a number of polling stations that came to the Supreme Court as ungazetted, non-existent polling stations that then were used to vary that election. To the extent that this bill can solve those three issues, it's a big step to the country. However, Madam Speaker, I think that this bill must also explore the entirety of an election process, which I don't think starts by the day of voting. I think that election starts becoming a fraud when we start by registering of voters. And this registration of voters, Madam Speaker, we have seen a number of disenfranchisement of voters. Even now, there are young people in this country, Madam Speaker, who would wish to be registered voters. But because the registration process and the issuance of IDs have been put as separate, Madam Speaker, I think we as a country should choose to believe that it is an offense if you're turning 18 years old and you are going to get your ID and you don't get it with your voter's card. It actually should be an offense. In fact, the issue of voter's card is something that this bill should help us question. If you have got an ID card that is genuine, why do you need a voter's card and you're already 18? And our laws say that at 18 you get an ID card, and at 18 you are a viable voter. Why then must this issue of voter's card be prohibitive for young people to be able to vote? We must be able to explore an amendment that I'll bring into this House on making sure that young people in this country can be able to get their ID cards and either their voter's card on time or use their ID as their voter's card. So that's one thing I'll be exploring, Madam Speaker. Number two, that I think is important in the registration process, Madam Speaker, is being able to clean our registers on time. I think that commissions at any given time, we must have a duration under which the commissioners must be able to clean the register. And if it is not cleaned the way we have seen a number of elections where a register of an election is not hygiene to conduct an election, so that you don't know which voters are in the register vis-a-vis which voters are actually viable to be able to vote, to the extent that the alteration of results in this country happen because of the issue of voter register, that the commission is being paid to take care of. And if this is something that should happen on a rolling basis, it should not happen that just by the time that we are going to the election is when you see this thing called mass voter registration, where commissioner wants to run around, and sometimes that audit of the voter register is not done properly. So this issue of registration, there are a number of offenses that the commission has done in this country that I'll be pushing amendments. I don't want to go into them in details, but I'll be pushing amendments on the registration of voters that I don't think that has been captured well in the offense that I'm seeing here. The second offense, Madam Speaker, that I think is very important is the role of the commission vis-a-vis the role of the secretariat in terms of looking at procurement as a process. Madam Speaker, if we don't solve the issue of procurement violations on election materials in this country, even if you hold an officer who is sitting on the day of election on some offenses, the election would have been rigged long time ago if there is no hygiene in our procurement processes. And there are a number of those violations, Madam Speaker, that I believe that we must be able to explore, and I'll be pushing those specific amendments on what constitutes offenses of procurement in nature. Because procurement of electoral materials, Madam Speaker, some of them start way before even the year of election starts. There are a number of indices that that have been seen that by the time an election comes in place, Madam Speaker, if you are to reflect on the election that we had in 2017 that was nullified by the Supreme Court, and then you juxtapose that election with the election that will happen in this country in 2022, Madam Speaker, you will find that the filth of those electoral processes happened at procurement, including the laws that our commission ends up signing with vendors abroad is extremely critical to be able to hold them accountable as an offense. For instance, Madam Speaker, if you take a vendor that you have procured from an electoral system, an electronic system that is supposed to deliver an election, and then you are a commissioner plus the secretariat who are the staffers of the commission, and then in that agreement, that contract, you do not protect the country's data such that the institutions that are like what we saw in mathematics, where the institution now has got more rights on the data in the system than Kenyans. Madam Speaker, I think that signing such agreements is tantamount to an offense, because that opens the country to serious procurement problems that then, if not addressed, compromises elections, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, so I will be pushing some serious amendments on procurement processes. And then the last one, Madam Speaker, that I want to talk about today, because of pressure of time, is the issue of audit of elections. Madam Speaker, it's very critical that even as we look at the active element of offenses during the time that election is being carried out, if you look at the act we are trying to amend here, the Election Act offenses of 2016, Madam Speaker, it has seriously negated holding the commission to account on the basis of being able to audit an election. And at what point should that election be audited? I think offenses should be put on every single audit trail so that you'll be able to show the country what the audit of an election should look like at the time of the election, just before results are given out without proper audit, after the results have been announced for all candidates at the local level and national level, and more importantly, after the gazettement of those results. Because if the audit query is not examined as offense, Madam Speaker, then it becomes very difficult to hold individuals who are running our electoral processes to account. So, Madam Speaker, this is a bill that is very good. It's a good start that will help us to look at unreasonable delays in elections. It will be able to help us look at altercation of results. It will be able to help us look at unexecuted polling stations as means of fraud. But I think there are larger questions in our electoral processes, Madam Speaker, that as I support this bill, I will be pushing forward for the amendment of this proposal, and we see whether we can be able to make sure that our elections can have proper measure of integrity through such kind of pieces of legislation. Therefore, I support, Madam Speaker, and I will be able to support further with amendments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Kenyuri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for granting me this opportunity. I wish to support this amendment that came as a product of the NADCO talks that were actually happening. I was privileged to be in the first bipartisan joint committee that was actually trying to solve issues that we were facing as a country. And I'm happy to see the product that came from the second team that went and looked at some of these issues and came with this legislative proposal. Madam Speaker, when you actually look at this amendment that has been sponsored by the minority leader and the majority leader, we have actually made huge progress, because when you actually look at elections in Kenya, elections in Africa, we've come a very long way. Look at elections in Africa and for our case, Kenya. Most of the experiences we've had consistent agitation and refusal to accept election results. Once the opposition or any other party that has lost refuses to accept election results, you definitely know we are going to plunge into endless either war or court processes. And in court, Madam Speaker, we end up wasting a lot of resources, which we would have rather combined forces with the person who has won elections to work for the country, or work at whatever level you've actually been elected to serve people, Madam Speaker. So when I actually look at some of the proposals that have been made in this amendment, I think we are making good progress, especially when we are now coming down to the staff and members of the commission, because this is where it matters most. Sometimes I say elections are actually won on the material day of voting, where you have to get your supporters cast a vote in your favor. And we have people who take advantage of those processes, Madam Speaker. At one point, I remember I was approaching a polling station, and some of the electoral staff were reaching out to me and telling me, Esther, this is how people in this polling station are voting. Little did they know that at the back of my mind, I had whoever I was voting for. So I tended to imagine then, if that can happen to someone who is informed like me, what about other people who might not have that similar benefit? What would actually be happening would be very absurd, because then we would have electoral officials influencing people or taking advantage of people they know cannot make certain decisions at that point. So these offenses that have been noted by this proposal and the punishments that are being meted on those who engage in such offenses will go a long way in stopping such crafty officials and members of staff of the commission trying to tamper with the general result of elections. Madam Speaker, also, in this country, not just Africa, elections are seen as a do or die matter. It's actually in Kenya where politics is a means to attainment of wealth. That's why right now, if you look at what most people want to pursue is politics, because people think it's a shortcut to being rich and achieving whatever ends you may want to meet, Madam Speaker. So if we actually make laws which are very clear and strict, we are going to make some of these people who want to aspire for political leadership be motivated more to serve and not more on the end they are going to achieve, Madam Speaker. Because this is a reason why in other countries, when you actually study their cases, people fight to an extent where there is no election where the winner will be allowed to work on their own other than have power sharing agreements. Madam Speaker, we've had power sharing agreements and you've seen the effects. Sometimes if if I would give my views as a private citizen, I say those are some of the worst leadership experiments we would want to engage in. So in respect for the rule of law, such proposals would be very good proposals to come, and we as Kenyans need to have a culture of respecting the rule of law. That needs to begin with us in political leadership, so that if you go to polls today and you lose an election, be very open-minded in accepting so that we can move forward. Additionally, if you're challenging the whole result, Madam Speaker, let it be within the law, whereby if it's the Form 34As at the polling station we are looking at, let it be that you really had agents who had those forms duly signed, so that when you are disputing that in court, you're not doctoring documents and coming to dispute using that, Madam Speaker. Why I'm saying that, we have most candidates who lose the election, and when they file petitions going to court, the evidence is not sufficient. And eventually you see what we get into, Madam Speaker. Finally, politics should be one way that we can transform the lives of people. Leave alone what is the interest of an individual, but the larger interest should be towards bettering the lives of the people we have had an opportunity to represent. And so I will fully support this amendment, and I know we'll keep learning as we advance, because in every election we experience new challenges, and as a result of those challenges that we think about new remedies to address such challenges. So the law is not very fixed. We'll keep getting amendments to suit citizens as it well applies to them, Madam Speaker. So thank you. I support this proposal.
Senator Kajwang.
Madam Speaker, I also rise to support the Election Offences Amendment bill that is before the House. And Madam Speaker, it's important to reflect that this is one of the outcomes of the National Dialogue Committee, which was established at some point in the history of this country to stabilize the political situation. And Madam Speaker, I'd like to hail those who participated as rapporteurs, as chairs, as members of the National Dialogue Committee, and even those who presented memoranda to that very important committee. We are now starting to see the outcome of the work they did in the form of various amendment laws. But we are also seeing that result in the pacification of politics. And Madam Speaker, I hope that we shall find an equilibrium where our politics is no longer highly charged, our politics is no longer tribal, our politics is no longer partisan. We'll find an equilibrium where politicians will be speaking for the good of the country. Madam Speaker, the amendments to the Election Offences Act are straightforward, and they are subject of a negotiated and a long-drawn process. However, Madam Speaker, it is my view that the various pieces of legislation relating to elections in this country need a complete overhaul. In fact, Madam Speaker, I believe that we need to perhaps redefine our electoral system so that it reflects the unique characteristics of our nation. It reflects our history and reflects emerging and contemporary trends. Madam Speaker, let me give a few examples of where we need to change our election laws. I have said it before, that rigging of elections begins at the point of registration of voters. And Madam Speaker, it is not rocket science. And I wonder why we, the political class, cannot just accept that once you have a national identity card, that then should be the instrument that you use on the voter's day. Because the qualification to get an identity card is the same qualification to get a voter's card. And I have always wondered, and in my 10 years in this House, in my 10 years in elective politics, I have always wondered why that matter does not feature very strongly in our conversations around empowering the young people and around transforming our electoral system. Madam Speaker, right now you will find there are certain areas which, until as at the last election, there has been no effort to recruit the newly acquired citizens to become voters. And then we are going to have a stampede, a few months to elections. We are going to have campaigns, very expensive campaigns, a few months to elections to onboard the young people as voters. Madam Speaker, how I wish, as we try to come up with national consensus on various matters, we could come up with that consensus that the national identity card is sufficient for our young people and for our citizens to participate in the voting exercise. Secondly, Madam Speaker, it would be important for purposes of national security and sovereignty to ring-fence our elections from foreign influence. When I looked at the process of tallying of election results at the Bomas of Kenya, I've always asked myself, what is the role and place of diplomats, ambassadors, and high commissioners at the tallying center? Madam Speaker, in the last election at Bomas, the American ambassador was very visible, was very, very visible. Her fingerprints were all over the place. The UK ambassador was all over the place. And when we asked why, we were told that the US and the UK governments were providing technical support to the electoral system and to the electoral process. If there is one exercise that we must completely ring-fence and keep away foreign influence, it is in our elections. Madam Speaker, I read somewhere today that if news can be fake, then history can also be fake. The history of Africa is replete with rigged elections engineered by the West. It is replete with assassinated leaders engineered by the West. It is replete with coup d'etats engineered by the West. Madam Speaker, I am a Pan-Africanist, and I believe that there are those forces out there, out of Africa, that believe that Africa should remain independent, and Africa should never be fully independent, and Africa should never self-determine its direction. Madam Speaker, we need a law that says that when it comes to the infrastructure, the systems, the processes, everything to do with our electoral system, we shall make it homegrown. And we have no shortage of skills, whether it is a technology. The other day, the CS Treasury was here telling us about e-citizen, developed by locals. It is handling billions of shillings on a daily basis or on a monthly basis. If we can trust our young people to build a system of that nature, why can't we trust them to build an electoral system so that we do not have to go to foreign countries to get that technology? Madam Speaker, even when it comes to capacity building, it should not go beyond our electoral officers making tours to those countries to see how they do it. But we should not have a situation where you've got a foreign-funded organization being the one offering technical and capacity building for our electoral officials and our electoral systems. I believe, Madam Speaker, even if it's just coming from ordinary revenue, even if it's coming from a specified fund, our electoral system should not be subject of multilateral or bilateral agreements. It should be homegrown, because if we do so, we rid our electoral system of foreign influence. And Madam Speaker, if you've read about the history of Africa, and not the fake version of African history, the West always has an interest in electoral outcomes, because whoever becomes the president of a country, Madam Speaker, sometimes influences the kind of relationships that country has with the West. We have seen interference in electoral systems in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Madam Speaker. Even in Kenya, Madam Speaker, I am convinced that there has been undue foreign influence in our electoral systems. And so that is part of what we need to look at in a complete and comprehensive overhaul of our election laws. Madam Speaker, the senators in this House have to spend a lot of money to get elected. Why? Because we've got an electoral system that has put the responsibility for trust and responsibility of ensuring accuracy of results on the candidate rather than the commission itself. Madam Speaker, you have heard previously when petitions have been taken to the Supreme Court on presidential election results, where the IEBC, that is mandated to ensure trust, accuracy, and integrity of results, referring to returns of agents of candidates. Madam Speaker, We should not be investing in agents in elections. If we have an independent electoral body that is of the highest integrity and credibility, and it is a very expensive undertaking. Madam Speaker, you can imagine, before election day, 3 days to elections, all of us here as senators, when you're organizing your own campaigns, you need to call your agents to a central place to train them. You call them to a central place to give them the oath of secrecy. You have to keep them in a central place so that they are not poached by your opponents. On election day, they have to be at the polling station. They have to be at the tallying center at night. They have to sit for 3-4 days waiting for the results to come out. Meanwhile, Madam Speaker, you are maintaining them, paying them allowances, giving them airtime, taking care of their food, taking care of their accommodation. Election day expenses of a senator in this House, Madam Speaker, is on average 10 million Kenya shillings. That is if you decide to deploy your agents in a proper manner. Of course, there are some of us who sometimes you find you don't have strong opposition, and then you decide to just ride on existing systems. But where the situation is tight, Madam Speaker, a senator will be required to have 10 million shillings for the 3 days pre and post-election. If you multiply that by the 47 counties, we are looking at an enterprise, Madam Speaker, that is hundreds of millions of shillings. It's actually billions, Madam Speaker, that could have been put to better use. And I've just spoken about the position of the senator. I've not spoken about the woman representative. I've not spoken about the governor. I've not spoken about the president. Madam Speaker, in the American system, it is estimated that political campaigns, and that was about 8 years ago, was costing 16 billion US dollars. 16 billion US dollars on politics. And that was more than the budget of half the American states. If you look at our expenses when it comes to elections, Madam Speaker, it is money that could have been directed to other places, but we spend it because we have no trust, because we have an electoral body that has not demonstrated integrity. Madam Speaker, we need to also look at the other laws that relate to spending on elections, but we can reduce that expenditure if we build institutions, technologies, systems, processes, and an infrastructure that inspires trust. Madam Speaker, it should be enough for a candidate to present themselves on election day, make sure that people vote, and trust that the IBC officials and the security officials that are there will be able to provide a result that reflects the voice of the people. And yet, we never trust them. When you see policemen in that hall, you feel that they've been sent by the state to rig you out. When you see IBC officials, the default mode is that they are going to rig you out. The fear is that they are going to be bribed by your opponent so that they can declare the wrong results. And as a result, our polling stations have become battlegrounds where each candidate has got 2 agents, 5 security people, 5 mobilizers. It is against the election laws, but it is something that happens. And that is why sometimes it takes too long for results to come out of polling stations. Madam Speaker, interestingly also, when the tallying has been done at that polling station, candidates insist that they must be part of that entourage that transmits the results to the constituency tallying center. And then candidates insist they must be part of that entourage that transmits results to the county tallying center. Madam Speaker, that is a system that is broken, and we have time for us to change it. Madam Speaker, many of the countries that we look up to, what we are calling modern democracies, be it the US, they are holding the elections in November, I think 4th of November. They do not have the same system of fast past the post that they are imposing on us. Look at France, Madam Speaker. France election is a 2-round election for the legislature. You only win on first round if you get 50%. But otherwise, if you don't get 50%, even as a member of the legislature, you have to go for the second round. Look at South Africa, proportional representation. Look at the United Kingdom. We are talking of a Westminster style of democracy. Where did we get this mongrel of first past the post, where elections have become ethnic census, where people sit down and say that we, the Basuba, we are many, or we, the Luo, or we, the Kikuyu, we are many, and so we are going to take the next election. And Madam Speaker, in the last conversation, there was something called Building Bridges Initiative. It was bastardized, It was shot down in the courts of law for lack of public participation, but there were some interesting proposals. I do recall a proposal that came from the governor of Kisumu, who is currently the ODM interim party leader. He had a proposal that we cannot take these Western systems in entirety. Let us try and build a homegrown solution where it is not a winner-takes-it-all approach, where it is not a first past the post, where it is not, our election is not an alliance of tribes. Madam Speaker, our election has been an alliance of tribes. It has been described in many words. There have been shareholding structures. There have been all sorts of conversations and nomenclature to our politics. It is wrong because it pits communities against each other. It pits tribes against each other. And our politics then becomes a game of chess where the antagonists are one tribe versus the other. We must rethink our electoral system, but this is going to take a very radical rethink, Madam Speaker, because when it suits those in power, then they are in no rush to change it. It is only when it does not suit them that they want to change it. And this conversation has been there from independence, and this is a conversation that brought the dichotomy between KADU and KANU. It was never settled, Madam Speaker, because we opted for a broad-based government at independence, the way we have opted for a broad-based government today. And as a result, Madam Speaker, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, 2 years later, was kicked out. They say history repeats itself. And I don't know which one comes first, as farce or as tragedy. But history truly repeats itself. The things we saw in 1965 have come back to haunt us in the year 2024. The things we saw post-independence, because of flawed politics of ethnicity, have come back to haunt us today. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, I want to encourage the House, Parliament, has a responsibility to scrutinize the report of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. That report should never be limited to mundane bureaucratic matters. I have gone to the IEBC website, Madam Speaker. Recently, in my usual visits to my county, I like going to a polling station and telling my people that in this polling station you gave me 90% of the vote, and I want to thank you for that. In the past, the IEBC had a portal where you could go and click and zoom and go all the way granular to a polling station. And you could tell the presidential results there, the gubernatorial, the senatorial, the constituency results at that point in time. Madam Speaker, that stopped happening. And yet we are advancing more. So we are more capable of manipulating big data. 10 years ago, the IBC had that portal. Today, 10 years later, when artificial intelligence, big data, data warehouses have advanced, we do not have that visibility. Today, if you are to ask how many votes you got across your respective counties, unless you go and look at the form, that declaration form, we must push the IEBC to be transparent. We must push the IEBC to be accountable to the people of Kenya. The results of elections should not be held as a secret. We are not running a cult. We are running an open, free, and fair electoral system. And so, Madam Speaker, while I support this amendment to the Election Offences Act, I believe that a complete overhaul is necessary along the lines that Senator Khalwale had mentioned earlier. In the year 2016, when we were in this House in the 11th Parliament, there was a crisis prior to that election. And there was a bipartisan approach, a bipartisan committee. We called it the Windsor Committee, led by Senator James Orengo and Senator Kiraitu Murungi, that gave us the minimum reforms that were necessary then. I believe that we have enough time not to go for minimum reforms, but we have enough time to go for comprehensive reforms. Madam Speaker, I support and I do pray that the other NADCO bills will find their way to the House for quick enactment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Newton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also rise to make my contribution to this amendment bill, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have a responsibility as members of this House to identify the problems that our people have and to make the necessary legislation, Madam Speaker. In this country, most of the problems that we have are related to elections, Madam Speaker. And every time we are going for elections, everybody gets scared of what is going to happen during and after the elections. This is because we do not believe in our systems, especially the electoral system. That is why I think it's very important that we come up with ideas that can help improve on this particular situation. And this bill could not have come at a better time, Madam Speaker. We know that in our history, the very many differences that we have had have come either just before the elections or after the elections. And why is this so, Madam Speaker? Because many people do not trust the system. And so, Madam Speaker, looking at this particular bill and noting that under the memorandum on objects and reasons as given by the majority leader and the minority leader, Madam Speaker, that we will create offenses for members and staff of the commission who unreasonably delay in declaring results or knowingly alter declared election results, Madam Speaker. I think the first step towards solving the very many problems that we have with our electoral system is making it a responsibility of the individual officer of IEBC. Because when we see IEBC as an institution for offenses committed by members of the IEBC, staff of the IEBC, then it does not become incumbent upon a member when they are executing their duties to take the necessary or the due diligence and care. That is why when we make it through this bill, when we make it mandatory that whoever commits an electoral offense as in the execution of their duties as officers of staff or staff of IEBC will face the music, then we shall be beginning to get somewhere, Madam Speaker. This delay in declaring election results are what caused us the problems that we had in 2002. Because anybody that watched the events that were happening at KICC could tell that the delay, especially in the then Juja constituency and the Rakanithi constituency, the results from those two constituencies, the delay in announcing the results of those two constituencies, Madam Speaker, led to the build-up of the tension that was there in the country, leading to post-election violence of 2002, Madam Speaker. And that is why this bill needs to be supported by anyone who wishes Kenya well. Madam Speaker, looking at offenses by members and staff of the commission, especially A, that is 6A, where we will make a law so that nobody makes an entry that they have enough reason to believe that it is not true. This is something very important because when cheating in election happens, when this stealing of elections happen, it's by altering the figures, Madam Speaker. That somebody has 21 votes in a particular polling station, but then rogue IEBC official or officer adds a 0, making it 210. If that is done repeatedly in several other polling stations, then of course they alter the overall result of an election. And that is why this should be supported. Madam Speaker, we have assisted voters. And even here, when a senator is not able to or fails to cast their vote electronically, of course, we jokingly call them assisted voters. These are voters going to their polling station, sometimes who do not know how to read or write, or who can't read or write, Madam Speaker. And these are therefore then assisted by officers of IEBC. And this is another avenue where where stealing of votes happen, so that you, the officer or the staff that is mandated with the responsibility of guiding such an assisted voter, then lead them in marking in the spaces that are not for the preferable or for the one that they came or they prefer to vote for, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have a problem also in this country. And it is also it's not just about elections. It's about, people faking disability. And that is why I'm excited about number C, that whoever allows, when you have a reasonable, you don't have a reasonable, a reasonable cause to believe that somebody is visually impaired or has a disability, if you allow them to vote in a way that is only specified for such people living in such disability, then that will be held accountable for that. Because this is something that we should discourage as a society, that nobody prefers living in the disability. So when somebody pretends, in order for them to be able to gain some advantage or some favor, they pretend to be living with this disability, then such a person and anyone assisting them should actually face the law, because that is what progressive societies do, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there was one election where the Right Honorable Raila Odinga went to Kibera to cast his vote. And then there was this particular presiding officer, and I can see that Senator Beth Siengo has actually raised her antenna. When the Right Honorable Raila Odinga went to that particular polling station, I may not remember which election it was, there was a presiding officer who first told him that he did not appear in the register of voters. And this caused a lot of panic, caused a lot of, tension, Madam Speaker. And it was not reasonable to do that, because such an officer ought to have known, ought to have, and I'm referring to number D, Madam Speaker, of 6, that if an officer willfully prevents any person from voting at a polling station at which they know or have reasonable cause to believe that such a person is entitled to vote, then of course the action should be taken to them, against them. Because such an officer should have known that the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, of course, was registered in that particular polling station, regardless of what the register said. And I think we are also going to, through this law, to make officers also use reasonable judgment, because everybody has their brains, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when we have people, when we have an election that is very close, 2 or 3 votes could mean a lot. And that is why numbers E and F under the same section 6 should be supported. That where somebody refuses to count any ballot paper, because even one vote can bring a difference, can make a difference, Madam Speaker, or they count a vote that they are not supposed to count, then action should be taken against them, Madam Speaker. And in conclusion, Madam Speaker, no officer should be allowed to omit anything in a breach of their official duty, because everybody should do their duty. That is why people are paid salaries. And Madam Speaker, unless people know that there is a consequence for any particular action, then they are not going to be serious about anything, Madam Speaker. And we must cure the problems that emanate from mismanaged elections, Madam Speaker. And so with those very few remarks, I support, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
The mover to reply. You're not pressed, you're not pressed, you're not there. There is no one on the dashboard. Okay, Senator Thangwa.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to also contribute on this Election Offences Amendment number 2 Bill 2024. And Madam Speaker, yes, I do support this bill because, of course, what the bill is suggesting, some of us have gone through it, and of course we would want it to be amended so that we can fill those gaps or seal the loopholes. Madam Speaker, as many have said, yes, the bill is supposed to cure the unreasonable delays when it comes to the announcement of election results, Madam Speaker. And I remember, although this is talking about the general election, I remember in 2017, Madam Speaker, there was a delay. I can give this as an example in Kiambu County, where the election of 2017, although it was the nomination, party nominations, where the results of the governor were announced, the results of the women rep were announced, but the results of the senator, they had to take about 3 days, Madam Speaker, to give the results. I think that was the period where the returning officers were cooking the results. So if this law was also to be applied within the political parties when they're doing their nominations, I think it can cure a lot of irregularities that would come with it, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the law is also talking about those returning officers who tally results of ungazetted polling stations. And also it has been discussed that no one, the returning officer or any other person, should interfere with the results, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, looking at this law and what it's trying to cure, I think we are going to bring more amendments to it, Madam Speaker, because it has been said here that the election is a process. So we don't want to just look at the issue of counting the votes, tallying, and announcing the results. We need to look at the process itself from the campaign period, Madam Speaker. I have a bill, Madam Speaker, that is coming, and I think I will try to see whether it can fit as an amendment in this amendment bill that has been moved here, Madam Speaker. And my bill was called the Anti-Campaign Lies Law, Madam Speaker. What am I talking about, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, there has been a lot of lies against candidates when people are trying to campaign. And by lying, they lie to the voter who does not vote according to the way they understand their candidate, but according to how they were lied to, Madam Speaker. The same anti-campaign lies law, Madam Speaker, it also talks about lying on promises and policies and manifestos, Madam Speaker. And this is something that we need to look at as a parliament, that we should not allow people to stand and lie to the voter, and the voter will make a decision thinking that I'm voting for you to provide what you've just said, and yet, once you get in there, you change. So you made me vote for you as per what you had said, Madam Speaker. So I think this is an amendment that we need to bring into this law. And I can give an example again in 2017, Madam Speaker. Again, is the campaign, the gubernatorial seat in Kiambu County in 2017, against the former governor, William Kabogo, and the former governor, Waitito Babayao, Madam Speaker. And it was said the governor then, in Kiambu County, had said nasty things about women. And by that, Madam Speaker, Governor Kabogo lost his seat. But nobody was able to prove whether he had actually said what it was purported to be said. And the person lost the seat. But since we do not have a law that talks about the anti-campaign lies law, he could not go anywhere. We call it propaganda and people think it's okay. Another example, Madam Speaker, we have the CS for mining. The CS, the former governor of Mombasa, Joho. He is on record, Madam Speaker, saying that he will never work with the President William Ruto. He called President Ruto a thief, and he said, I cannot work with him. Madam Speaker, many people never voted for William Ruto then because they believe in Joho. But today, Joho is in government. He is working under the same president, the same Ruto that he said he will never work with. So, Madam Speaker, they lied to the voters, and the voters did not make the right decision. The voters of Mombasa never voted for us, never voted for Ruto, never voted for President Ruto, Madam Speaker, because they believed in what was said by the then Governor Joho, Madam Speaker. So what I'm trying to say, and what I'm...
What's your point of order, Senator Eddy?
Madam Speaker, I rise under Standing Order number 105. Madam Speaker, read together with Standing Order number 101 and with prevalence of Standing Order number 101 on content of speech. Madam Speaker, the content of speech of the Senator of Kiambu has provoked the word "they lied to the people." And this is discussing the person of Honorable Joe, who is the CS for blue economy, mining in the country, Madam Speaker. There's a duality in that statement, Madam Speaker. There is one statement of fact issues that arises from the standing orders, but more importantly, Madam Speaker, is that it is discussing the persona of Honorable Joe to the extent that the Senator of Kiambu is mischaracterizing and prosecuting the persona of the CS in this House without a substantive motion, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I think that is very out of order, and I think he should be able to withdraw that statement, apologize to the CS Joe, vehemently so, and if possible, Madam Speaker, if he must speak the kind of language that he has put on the character of the CS, Madam Speaker, then
Senator Eddy,
it has to be the substantive motion.
You've actually made your point on there, your point of order. Senator Karungo, do you want to substantiate at a later time, or do you want to withdraw?
Madam Speaker, now, this is what we are trying to cure. The truth, Madam Speaker. I have nothing to apologize about, because it is in the public domain. And if you'd want me to substantiate,
Senator Karungo,
I'll bring that
please,
clip here.
Substantiate your statement by tomorrow, by Monday, when we.
Yes,
when the
and I
House
hope,
resumes.
Madam Speaker, when I substantiate, you will allow for us to play a clip or a video of the said CS.
Senator Karungo, please proceed.
I will do that, Madam Speaker. I will do that, Madam Speaker. And thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam
Senator
Speaker,
Eddy, what is your
protects
point of order?
me.
He has not even spoken. No, just speak where you are, please.
Madam Speaker, I stood under the point of order 101 and point of order 105. The Senator of Kiambu has responded to point of order 105, where he says he can be able to substantiate, Madam Speaker. But that substantiation, Madam Speaker, is an allegation that is tantamount to discussing the character of the CS, Madam Speaker. Understanding order 101, he cannot discuss the
Senator
CS
Eddy,
without a substantive motion.
That decision can only be made once he substantiates. Please.
Madam Speaker, I would say that Senator Eddy has a red tie.
Order, Senator Eddy. He has not continued to discuss the CS. That is your own saying, please.
Thank
Senator
you very much.
Karungo, you will substantiate
Yes,
on Monday and proceed with your statement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll do so. Madam Speaker, we can always substantiate the truth, and we will do that, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. What I'm trying to say, Madam Speaker, is that this law is only talking about the voting, how to vote, where to vote, the tallying, the counting of votes, and then projecting the votes to the country to understand or to know the results, Madam Speaker. And that's what I'm saying. The issue is not about counting the votes. We are all here, Madam Speaker. We were voted for. It was counted. It was announced. It was said that so-and-so won. We even went to the courts, and it was ruled that so-and-so won, Madam Speaker. The issue is not about that. The issue is about the process of how we got there, Madam Speaker. And that is what we should cure. And I said, the issue of campaigns, Madam Speaker, there is a lot of misinformation and false statements in political campaigns. And that kind of misinformation misleads the voter about the candidate, about the policies, and of course about the election process, Madam Speaker. I remember, and I like giving these examples, and I hope Senator Eddie won't start when I give this example. During the Moi era, Madam Speaker, people were being lied to. They were told, if you don't want Moi, you put X where his name is. Madam Speaker, it was said all over. But you know, by putting X next to a person, that is a mark to vote for someone. And that's how people were winning election, by misleading people, by telling, if you want so-and-so, you put right, and if you don't want them, you put X. So again, you destroy the vote, Madam Speaker. So this is what we are talking about when it comes to misleading the people when they are making a decision. Madam Speaker, we need to protect the voters' rights. And that is the example that I gave that here today, Madam Speaker, by penalizing false statements that may influence voters' behavior, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was voted for. I said I will stand with my people and I will listen to my people, Madam Speaker. And this was said, and I like Senator Kajwang the other day, he is on record, saying that maybe we should also make it very easy for the citizens of this country to recall us from the parliament. We should make it easy for the public to impeach a senator and impeach a member of parliament. We have made it easy for governors. We have made it easy for presidents and deputy presidents. And now, Madam Speaker, by the way, we never knew you could remove a vice president. Now we have seen. Now, it's a drill, Madam Speaker. Maybe what is coming is bigger than that, Madam Speaker. But what I'm trying to say here, Madam Speaker, is that now we know that it is easy to impeach a deputy president, a governor, a deputy governor. But why is it so hard to remove an MP? Why is it so hard to remove a senator? I stand with Senator Kajwang when he says he's going to bring the law that will make it easier for us, for the public, to remove the MPs and the senators and the MCA, yes. I think I'm going to add that, Madam Speaker. Because when we were voted for, we said we are going to listen to our people. Are we listening to them? Our people tell us, don't pass the finance bill. They even come to the streets, but we still pass, Madam Speaker. So I think this bill is an issue of not just votes. We also need to protect or to make it an election offense when you lie to the people for them to vote for you. Because lying to the people to vote for you, you are voted under pretense, Madam Speaker. And that is conmanship, and that is against the law, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I support this bill with the amendment, I want to give an example. In 2010, the general election of the United Kingdom, there is a candidate by the name Phil Woolers, Madam Speaker, of the Labour Party, who was found guilty of false information following the Section 106 of the UK Representation of the People's Act, Madam Speaker. And what was the problem, or what was his issue, or why was his election nullified? It was nullified, Madam Speaker, because he lied against his opponent by the name Ellie Watkins, Madam Speaker. How did he lie? He said, if you vote for this man, he is an extremist. He is following Muslims. And if you vote for him, he will run away from the constituency and live in another constituency, Madam Speaker. But their law protects that. So Mr. Watkins went to court and said, how did he know I'm going to move? How did he know I was an extremist? And so the court listened to the case, and his election was nullified and was barred from running for the next 3 years, Madam Speaker. We need to clean our electoral system, we need to clean our electoral processes, and we need to clean we need to protect the integrity of the vote, to protect the people who vote for us. So I will support this bill, and I'll be bringing more amendment to it, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Senator Mungatana.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to say on the onset that there are very many good provisions in this bill, in this amendment bill, and I support it. But Madam Speaker, I think we need to improve on some of the provisions which have been made in these proposed amendments. And Madam Speaker, I don't believe that these improvements would be outside the purview of the NADCO agreements, but it would just clarify what we mean or what we meant to mean within this amendment bill. Madam Speaker, I'm looking at the proposed 38A and the proposed 39. These clauses, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, that deal with the declarations of results, they are not very clear. And I think some clarity at the stage of amendments at the committee stage, we will need to put some clarity into this. Madam Speaker, 39, which is a new proposed clause, is talking about determination and declaration of results. Now it says that the Commission shall determine, declare, and publish the results of an election immediately after the close of the polling, and results declared at the polling station shall be final. But again, it goes on to say in 39 subclause 4, for purposes of a presidential election, the Commission shall tally, announce, and declare the presidential results before tallying, announcing, and declaring the results for other elective positions. Madam Speaker, we need to improve this. Why? If the tallying has been done for the other positions, but the presidential tally has not been done, why should we delay the constituency returning officer by putting this requirement that we need to have the presidential results first declared? I don't think this is a useful kind of legislation, because it tends to try and manage the actual intelligence, or they try to micromanage what the constituency returning officer should do and what the county returning officer should do. Why should we wait for the tallying of the results of the presidential candidates before we announce the results of the member of parliament or the results of the member of the county assembly? Why should we tie those things together? The member of county assembly has his own ballot, has his own campaign, his own results, and then maybe they have finished counting, they have finished tallying. Why should we delay the announcing? Because maybe the president's polling station, in that polling station, has a lot more, and yet we have finished with this one. Why can't we just remove this particular provision? Because this particular provision is micromanaging the constituency returning officers. So, Madam Speaker, I want to also use this opportunity to give notice that this one and others that I have seen need to be improved, and I will be bringing those improvements or further amendments to this law. Madam Speaker, I'm looking at clause number 23, and this deals with the amendments that have to do with the procurement process for the technology that will be used during the counting. Madam Speaker, there are good provisions that have set out the kind of technology, and I'm happy to see that even the intellectual property rights of the technology that we are going to use during the elections shall now, by law, vest in the commission. So the issue of we have to access the servers, I don't know from which country or outside Kenya, that issue now has been dealt with by law. And I think this is a very good improvement in our system. But Madam Speaker, what I thought that is lacking in this provision, we need to have by law a requirement that IEBC will have to do a trial run of the process. And we have the political parties forum where all political parties are members and they are registered members there. We need to have a trial run so that everybody can say we in fact went through the process. The IEBC took us through the process, how a person is supposed to vote, how the tallying is supposed to be done, how the transmission of results is supposed to be done, and how we will also have a verification if we need to, so that, Madam Speaker, every political party signs to it, so that we have fidelity to the law and to the reflection of the will of the people. Madam Speaker, we need to put this provision somewhere, that a trial run must be done. Political parties and all those other independents who intend to run independent can have a look. Because, Madam Speaker, the problem in this country has been the integrity of the system of electioneering. And, Madam Speaker, I have observed elections in other countries. I have had the fortune of observing on behalf of the Pan-African Parliament, which this Senate graciously sent me to. And, Madam Speaker, I have seen IEBC, equivalent of IEBC officials, they take the people prior to the elections, and they see the whole system. There's no hiding the system. And before, days before the elections, again, members of political parties and officials are taken through the system again and told that if you had issues with the previous trial run, we want you to see now what we have improved, so that you can agree with us when we declare these results that these is a reflection of the will of the people. Madam Speaker, we have to have a system that has all the integrity requirements, and it has the goodwill of political parties and those who intend to run for the elections as independents. Madam Speaker, on the question of evaluation of the elections, Madam Speaker, I generally support this, but we must look at the cost element. We must also not make elections so expensive to operate and even more expensive after electioneering process during evaluation. So, Madam Speaker, I think for the sake of predictability, we need the firms that will be evaluating to be known in advance, to have been put on the list as service providers to that effect, and that there's some indication in terms of the cost. Why, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, is because the cost of elections in Kenya has been so large, and even right now, when we fund IEBC, we are always told there are debts to pay. There are suppliers who have not, even to date, there are still suppliers who have not been given their checks. So, Madam Speaker, we need to be careful about exaggerating the cost of elections, to include evaluation, put it in the law, but we are not looking at the costing. So, Madam Speaker, we think that IEBC should be directed through law or regulations, that the people who are going to provide this service must be known in time and the kind of quotation they will bring, so that we are happy to spend that money at the cost that they will is reasonable. Madam Speaker, I'm happy, very happy about the requirement in this law that says that 3 months before the election, we must have all the polling stations gazetted. This is a very good one. Why, Madam Speaker? Because in some instances, counties as huge as Tana River County, Madam Speaker, sometimes that latitude to open polling stations has been abused in the electioneering process. Why? Because some polling stations are introduced very near to the election, when actually you people are campaigning. When the candidates, we are on the campaign trail, we are told there's this other new polling station that has been gazetted. And now, as a candidate, you have not planned for those polling stations. And the distances are so huge. And this makes a lot of sense to say that 3 months before the general election, all the polling stations must be gazetted and we must know them. So those who are intent on campaigning for various positions can be clear. We've got to create some predictability around electioneering. So I'm very happy about that proposed amendment. Then, Mr. Speaker, now, there has been some problems, and I'm very glad that Clause 22 has captured this challenge, that sometimes people have gone to court to say that the transmitted results, electronically transmitted results, are not true. They have even created huge issues around that, creating uncertainties around the country, especially when it comes to presidential elections, that we are not sure whether these results that were transmitted electronically are the truth. So it is now very clear through this law that the verified, declared results in every polling station, they shall prevail. Those physical results shall prevail if there are any doubts about the electronically transmitted results. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I also think that inside this law, we should be able to create some consequences for those of us who are candidates and we just refuse to accept results. This is something that we need to deal with. Because if I am running for Senate and then I refuse the results, and yet my political party participated in the trial run that I'm suggesting should be there, they signed against the fact that this system that is owned by IBC is correct, this system is good, and then after that, I disparage the results. I just say IBC was compromised. I think we must have some consequences against candidates like those. In Kiswahili, Mr. Speaker, there's a saying that says, asiyekubali kushindwa sio mshindani. Mr. Speaker, it creates a lot of tension when a governor says the results are fake, when a presidential candidate says the results are fake. It is not right. Let us say that if we have gotten the electronic system proper, we have all signed to it as political parties. We have all signed to it as independent candidates. And then if you come back and you start telling us that I don't accept those results, then challenge with specificity. Go and say there's a fake result in polling station A, B, C, D. But don't stand up and start causing tension around the country. Because already, Mr. Speaker, when people are in election mode, there's a lot of tension. So I'm glad that this law has attempted to deal with the various issues, but we also need to bring in some matters here that will bind candidates who are not being honest with themselves and with the system of electioneering that we chose as a nation. Mr. Speaker, I'm going back to the evaluation report. The evaluation report has given a framework, and clause 87A. And it has listed that the audit must include the review of the legal framework. It has said there will be a review of the role of the media, the role of civil society, voting procedures on election day, and so many things, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker. But then, it doesn't say, what do we do with this report? So it is like an exercise in futility. It's like writing a thesis and then leaving it at the university library. I was going to propose that a proper way of the audit, dealing with this audit, must be found. That should include sending to the various agencies for action, so that if there was fraud, for example, that was found by that report, that there were exaggerated costs in the electioneering process for the procurement of certain goods, then people must bear consequences. If they say that the information technology was compromised, what we were shown is not what happened during the election, there must be consequences. So it is not enough to say that we should review, carry out an audit of what happened in the elections. The audit must be followed by action. And that action must be given within a time limit, within 6 months. Consequences must revisit those who mismanaged the election, those who committed crimes in the electioneering period. Because in this way, we would create certainty. Officials who are charged with this sacred job will not mess up with the people of Kenya, wherever they are voting and whatever it is that they are doing. So I would be proposing amendments to buttress this provision so that this evaluation can go somewhere. It should not be like a thesis in the university. And I would also be proposing change on some of these provisions to provide for trial run for the technology, so that, Mr. Speaker, the people of Kenya can have confidence in the integrity of the election process. But on the whole, this is a very good improvement of the election laws that we have. Mr. Speaker, the election laws must continue to be changed. They must continue to be improved. They must continue to be fertilized so that we can have elections that have integrity in this country. Mr. Speaker, we don't want a situation where when people are going for elections, people have tension. We should be like other countries. The other day I was in Tanzania, and you wouldn't even know, Mr. Speaker, that there's going to be elections next year. If it was Kenya, it would be a very different scenario. And even in South Africa, Mr. Speaker, I saw people, you know, it's not like here. Why? Because they have kept on continually improving on the integrity of the election system. So we need these laws, and we need to keep doing it, and keep evaluating, keep improving until we get it right in this country. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I beg to support. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mungatana. I now call upon Senator Samson Cherargei.
Yellow on. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I want to support with reservations this Elections Amendment Bill number 2 of 2024. Mr. Speaker, if there is any aspect in this parliament and in this republic that we have over-legislated, we continue to over-legislate, is the issue of elections laws in this country. We have amended the Election Act until we don't know the original Election Act of 2011, Mr. Speaker. So, and therefore, it shows our mistrust. the value system on accountability and transparency and ability to trust the institutions as a country, Mr. Speaker. You no longer know the identity of election law or act as it was assented to by President Mwai Kibaki in 2011, Mr. Speaker. You know, in us who grew up in rural areas, Mr. Speaker, and maybe you also, you used to go to school and you used to walk mungu shoes, or what we call barefooted, and then you used to have short, Mr. Speaker, that used to have a lot of patches in Apigwa Kiraka. You used to, until the original short that you are wearing to primary has changed color. And I think that is what happened with the elections laws. We no longer, the original identity of what elections laws were has been changed, Mr. Speaker, through the character. Even in the last session when I chaired the JLAC, we did try and amend and review and delete the elections laws that we have in this country, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it behooves that the issue with our elections is the deficit of trust. It is nothing else, Mr. Speaker. It is not about lack of laws. It is not about the institutions that we have, whether these IEBC, Mr. Speaker. You are aware today as we talk, Banisa people and other county assemblies are yet to, and even Magarini, are yet to elect their members of parliament, which continues to challenge the validity of existence of parliament as constitution, not only on issue of gender, but in terms of representation, because the people of Magarini, the people of Banisa, the people of county assemblies, MCS who are yet to receive elections, Mr. Speaker, they are yet to be represented either in the county assembly or in the Senate or in the National Assembly at the National Parliament. So, Mr. Speaker, it is not lack of the laws. It is lack of the deficit of trust in our institutions. When you believe that since you did not lose, and I want to pick it where my brother Danson has left, that where people claim victory, where people go and declare themselves as it should, Mr. Speaker, especially in an election process. Mr. Speaker, I am happy. I think this bill, Mr. Speaker, is essentially wants to do cleanup of the elections laws and elections act, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a cleanup. Others are reactionary. Others are because of political right, you know, want to water down. I've seen the deletion of recall clause based on the decisions of the courts that have decided in Wambui case, Mr. Speaker. And even on the Katiba Institute, where section 45 and 48 of the Elections Act, the parent act, it has been deleted based on a court's decision. Yet we should be reviewing to allow members, Mr. Speaker, because there are many factors, the safeguards this constitution has put on state officials. One is the impeachment process. 2 is vote of no confidence. 3 is the censure motion. 4 is the recall. These are safeguards that the constitution has provided to checkmate the elected officials or state officers within the structure, Mr. Speaker. So when you see this bill trying to delete a section, purportedly that it was based on Wambui case or Katiba Institute case that was being decided, Mr. Speaker, we are undermining the right of recall, which is a constitutional matter, which is given a safeguard, Mr. Speaker, and therefore I found the drafters being mischievous. You know, we'll be creating political demigods. Because now, Mr. Speaker, if you are an elected member of parliament or an MCA, and you know you cannot be recalled, that can be a face of impunity, Mr. Speaker. Like governors, the president and the deputy president can suffer the fate of either censure motion, even cabinet secretaries through vote of no confidence. And Mr. Speaker, even in the essence, the issue of impeachment proceedings against governor, deputy president, or the president, and also in state officers, the vote of no confidence, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that's my point number 1. Point number 2, Mr. Speaker, is I'm happy in the section 6, and therefore I don't agree with deletion of section 45 and 48 of the Principal Elections Act, because it comes out as it doesn't come in good faith, Mr. Speaker. Number 2, I'm happy that there is an amendment to allow commission voters to be operated and open, and therefore at all times, except during elections, during by-election, during general election or a referendum, Those are valid exceptions, Mr. Speaker, but members of public or voters can access the register and be able to verify and confirm their details, Mr. Speaker. And it is also high time as a country and to encourage many young people who are here to register as voters to use the opportunity to register, Mr. Speaker, so that they can make their voice be heard. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, on United Nations Declaration on Human, Civil and Political Rights, and even the 1948 United Declaration on Human Rights, one of the rights is the right to vote, another right is to participate in political rights as envisaged in Article 38 of the Constitution of Kenya, and even international instruments, which Article 2.6 of the Constitution 2010 of the Republic of Kenya emphasize on that need, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and therefore that access gives impetus. It gives the right to vote, the right to participate in an election, the right to register as a voter is the import that the Constitution envisaged under from Article 80, Mr. Speaker, or 87, 88, thereabout, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, number 3, the issue of deletion. Mr. Speaker, I have seen, interestingly, when you look at Section 22, I think in the original, that will be number 3, I think the people who should celebrate today, you know, we said leadership, Mr. Speaker, you don't need to go to school to be a leader. When you look at things, Section 22, we had proposed, apart from other requirements, if you wanted to run for member of parliament, either as a senator or National Assembly, you needed to have a degree. And you remember we had postponed that requirement for almost in 2 elections, Mr. Speaker. One of them, Mr. Speaker, was that you should have a degree from a recognized university if you wanted to, Mr. Speaker, to be run as a member of MP and also as member of the county assembly. Mr. Speaker, this section has been deleted. Mr. Speaker, this section has been deleted. Sorry, it was a section, I think it was in Wamboi case, sorry, I mixed it up. In Katiba Institute, Mr. Speaker, where clause 25 deletes section 45. One of the reasons, Mr. Speaker, on section 45 was that before you run, there are minimum requirements like you must be a Kenyan, you must be registered, Mr. Speaker, you must, and I think, Mr. Speaker, that is section 22, sorry, of the Act, of the Parent Act. Mr. Speaker, I think the people who should celebrate the most tonight is the MCAs and members of parliament, because we have removed educational requirements. What you need to do is to convince the voters why they need to elect you. You need to know how to speak Swahili or English or sign language as provided by law. And you need to provide an ID, Mr. Speaker. So this is for people who are arguing that Parliament had intention of locking out any other potential people to become elected members of Parliament or MCAs. Today, if we pass this proposal, it will mean there will be no need of educational requirements, except to know how to read and write, and to either speak in Kiswahili or English or sign language, because those are national languages, Mr. Speaker. And this comes from the NADCO. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't know, it will be now to the wisdom of voters, now that everybody can run. So long as you are not alien, so long as you are now the education requirement has been removed, and this is a significant milestone, because I have many friends, Mr. Speaker, who either or another way, they have a reason why they don't do school. They can be good MCAs, they can be good senators, they can be good members of parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is the biggest milestone, and I support, because personally, I believe leadership, Mr. Speaker, should not be based on your educational quality. While education is good, and I want to say this without fear of contradiction, while I support this, Mr. Speaker, it behooves you, I'm also learned, and I'm not saying there is no place of education in leadership. Education will allow you the ability, the capacity, the competency to be able, Mr. Speaker, to grapple with issues of wide range. But other people say leadership sometimes is about wisdom. Other people say it's about experience. Others, so education will just become part and parcel. And therefore, I want to ask many young people, and you know, the Gen Z and many others, our age, God was gracious enough, we went to school. I'm not saying that people should not go to school. They should go to school. But what we are avoiding is to be discriminative as against the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya, as was said by the Wambui case. I think she was the former member of Otaya after Kibaki retired, and that was the precedent in terms of reviewing of Section 22. So to the MCS, I know a number of MCS, Mr. Speaker, has been calling us. When NADCO report was being done, most of the MCS and a number of members of parliament were worried with this provision. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, even it will assist us with this issue of fake academic documents. You know, as elections approaches, you find some people, even people who wanted to run for serious seats, apart from MCA and MPs, they had to go and manufacture fake academic documents and degrees, Mr. Speaker. I think now that it is no need, I hope the manufacturing and fake will come to a stop now that it will not be needed, Mr. Speaker. But I want to encourage colleagues in leadership that also you need to make progress. Even personally, I'm still in school, despite that of number of academics. I'm not professing that I'm more learned than more people here, but at least, Mr. Speaker, as leaders, if you need to grow, if you need to run for governor and president, of course, and deputy president, you must have a degree, and think that's a constitutional provision, Mr. Speaker. So I saw that as a significant, where we no longer need academic requirements, Mr. Speaker, on that issue. On the issue of number 4, in the Gazette, the names of political parties, I think this the principal act after Section 33, by introducing 33A, we need to know who will run for an election. We need to know who runs with a party and independent candidates. And I think this is very important, Mr. Speaker, so that wananchi or the voters will be well versed. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the introduction of section clause 38A by amending Section 38 of the Parent Act, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Commission shall appoint a place or polling station for each electoral area, which must be gazetted. I agree it should be published, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes they normally say per polling station or per polling center, at least 700 per, they use classrooms, because most of it we use primary schools. So there are places, Mr. Speaker, like Nairobi, another place where there are huge population. At least IEBC will be given a leeway to increase the number of polling stations so that it allows efficiency. Because you remember the voters sometimes have challenges of sickness, others are disabled. Although I know there is priority, Mr. Speaker, others are expectant, others are sickly, and therefore we wouldn't want a scenario of Kideri man, where a Kideri man just queue with the Kideri and they get head of state commendation. And some people who have worked for this country have never even seen that head of state commendation, Mr. Speaker. So we want to reduce and ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we give that latitude, and it should be gazetted. I think we need to have a timeline on when it can be gazetted, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you look at the section 30, and therefore with the new section, Mr. Speaker, the Commission shall determine, declare, and publish the results of election immediately after the close of polling results shall be declared at the polling station that be final. Mr. Speaker, this issue has been canvassed in the court of law for the longest time possible, Mr. Speaker, and you are aware. The law has always said the results declared at the polling station shall be final. And I'm happy this section 39 that is being introduced, clause 39, declare the polling station shall be final, so that we avoid where there is stuffing of ballot papers. You know, if you move from one polling station to another, if you move, for example, from St. Francis Chapter 8 polling station in Mosoria to maybe in Daptapa Primary School, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of, you know, Mr. Speaker, during election, Satan is always active. He's always perambulating and galvanating.
Could you please approach the chair for a moment? You'll go back and conclude on your speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for those guided directions. I think those were general comments. Let me now delve into the serious issues, Mr. Speaker, on the election offenses. And I think what I was saying, you can tie it up, because I was saying when you are moving election results from one polling station to another, Mr. Speaker, there can be stuffing of ballot papers. And you know, if you are taking from, for example, Keumbu to maybe Siongroi, you know, I was saying Satan is always active during election period. And that night, especially, in fact, during even nominations, Mr. Speaker, and the open way to ensure that, and it ties up, Mr. Speaker, with my earlier submissions where I've said, in areas like cities like Nairobi, Mr. Speaker, you find there is a lot of population, there are voters, there are any challenges, Mr. Speaker, and I think it should be gazetted. Say that if you are found in an ungazetted place, Mr. Speaker, it becomes a very serious issue. And Mr. Speaker, this is a serious offense. This is how rigging happens, Mr. Speaker, because you know the worst for any country is to get wrong leaders in leadership. If today you have ungazetted polling stations all over, rigging happens, stuffing of ballot papers, the worst to a country is to have a wrong person in a seat because they will not serve, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of knowingly or intentionally interferes, alters, or intentionally causes another person to interfere or alter, declare results. Mr. Speaker, causes another person to interfere or alter declared results. Mr. Speaker, I think we did it in 2007 and we knew the consequences, where people declare themselves, Mr. Speaker, which is very unfortunate, and it must be punished. Because, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, in my opening remarks, and I want to repeat, the challenge we have in this country is not lack of institutions. It is lack of deficit of trust and belief in the independent institutions, Mr. Speaker. For example, if another to interfere or alter declared results, or intentionally to interfere, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious electoral offense. We know it can even plunge the country into chaos. Mr. Speaker, you can imagine if we have two presidential candidates running almost concurrently, Mr. Speaker, I think if we were respecting the IEBC, we should not, Mr. Speaker, because if we have that trust, it becomes very easy, Mr. Speaker, another person to interfere or declare results. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the amendment on Section 6 and the set of the title, I think the upshot, Mr. Speaker, in this report, the upshot, and I just want to run through just in quick succession so that I conclude with this part, is a return which they are to keep under written law. I think what we need to do is to vet the staff that are there, reasonable cause to believe to write in FOTA provided for unable to read or write, to believe, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what you mean, because, Mr. Speaker, there are people who are disabled. There are people who are old, who cannot read and write. So we need, so that we don't disfranchise these kind of voters. And you know they are very common in our villages. They might want to vote for Sike or Cherargei, but they only, or Mutinda, but they can only express. So how do we ensure that? Mr. Speaker, permits any person of reasonable to believe to be visually impaired. I think these are PWDs. Mr. Speaker, I think we need to work with disability organization, willingly prevents any person from voting at the polling station at which they know or have a reasonable cause to believe such person is entitled to vote, willingly rejects or refuses to count any ballot paper. Mr. Speaker, I think the process is very clear. A ballot paper is being displayed. When you tick, when you tick outside the box, does it invalidate that ballot paper? We need a ruling because, Mr. Speaker, sometimes there are more rejected ballot papers than the valid ballot papers, or invalid. How do you classify when people tick two boxes or put an X or a tick, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I think on that, the validity or the ballot paper, there is also to count any ballot paper which they know or have reasonable cause is validly cast for any candidate in accordance with the provisions of site region. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this is normally a problem. You see the problem happens, Mr. Speaker, is when the ballot paper is a contest whether it's valid or not. Because sometimes people tick outside the box, others put X, Mr. Speaker, others throw cows. Somebody can draw a cow, or can draw, there is new song by Trio Mio called Nimekumak. Some people can say Nimekumak, so you never know. So the issue should be, even a mark, does it qualify to give it a valid, Mr. Speaker? And then number 5, as being for, which is, these are just errors, we need to agree, especially, Mr. Speaker, that, and then, Mr. Speaker, this is bribery. I've seen, just a minute to conclude, Mr. Speaker, this is bribery, and I think this should be punished alongside other election laws. Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I beg to support, and we need to review the issue of electoral offenses so that we can increase more catalog and punish people who might interfere with the electoral process, because invalid election causes instability in the country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Sharage. Senator Mundigi Alexander.
Asanti, Bwana Speaker. Naunga mjadala ambaye ni wa majority, Mr. Serioti, ambaye kuhusikana kutengenezwa kwa mambo ya sheria ya uchaguzi. Yangu ni kusema ni vizuri kila mara kwa mara mambo mingi iwe ikipandilishwa kulingana na vile mambo inaendelea ya mitambo ikiendelea. Kama mambo ya uchaguzi tunajua katika uondi nyingi ama vituo vya uchaguzi kuna kuanga na shinda, lakini ningeomba serikali iweze kupatia IMBC mambo ya ela juu ya mitambo, kwa sababu Bwana Speaker, tumekuwa tukiona uchaguzi ikifanyika polling stations zingine zinakuanga na shinda kwa sababu haikuangi na stima, zile zingine haikuangi hata ile vitu ya kupeleka kule kwa vituo, unakuta wale maafisa wa vituo inakuanga na shinda. Zile zingine ni kuwa vituo zingine unakuta mvua imenyesha na hakuna magari ama vitu ambaye inafaa. Kwa hiyo Bwana Speaker, ningeunga mkono vitu nyingi iweze kupandilishwa. Pia Bwana Speaker, naunga mkono mambo ya uchaguzi juu ya wale watu wanakuwa wanasimama kama MCA, senator na pia MP na women rep, juu ya kuondoa makatasi ya ndingiri, kwa sababu tumeona siku hizi juu ya kila mtu aweze kuonekana, Bwana Speaker, kwa sababu tunajua tumeona watu, si ati tunasema elimu ni mbaya, kwa sababu hata sisi enyewe sisi wote siku hizi tunajua elimu bora ndio msingi ya maisha ya vijana wetu ama msingi ya mambo ya dunia. Na tumeona hata watu wengine wafanya biashara wanafanya kazi kulingana vile inafaa. Tumeona vile wamesaidia masinani, kwa hivyo naunga mkono. Hata isipokuwa ni vile akuwezekani, ningeomba wale watu wako na hiyo mjadala, hata kiti ya governor ingekuwa inaondoa ndingiri, kwa sababu tumeona watu wengi wako na unjuzi ambaye kama yule alikuwa Solomon katika Biblia. Kwa hiyo Bwana Speaker, naunga mkono, na pia naunga mkono Bwana Speaker, mambo mingi ipandilishwe, na pia mambo ingine ingepandilishwa ni wale watu wanalipwa mambo ya uchaguzi, wale watu wanapeleka magari pale kwa vituo inakuanga na shinda sana. Unakuta watu wengine mpaka leo katika Kenya wanja hai kulipwa, na ni kitu moja ya aibu sana, kwa sababu watu wengi Bwana Speaker wamekuwa wakitafutwa, wanapatiwa subcontract inapatiwa mtu mwingine. Ingekuwa na njia ile nafaa ndio kila mtu aweze kuserekea mambo ya uchaguzi, kwa sababu saa hii hata magari mingi watu wengi walishoto magari yao kwa sababu watu wengi walikuwa wasafirisha mambo ya uchaguzi afuta kupeleka vitu ya kule mahali makatasi inahesabiwa na uchaguzi imetangazwa, unakuta mambo imeharibika. Kwa hivyo Bwana Speaker, naunga mkono mjadala ambaye ni wa majority, Mr. Serioti, iweze kupandilishwa, iweze kuonekana na njia ile inafaa, kwa sababu mambo mingi
I really want to appreciate the contribution of all our colleagues that have taken time to speak to this very important bill. I say it's important because we are the practitioners. We are the political players, Mr. Speaker. And I observed this when we were moving the bill, that many times in the excitement of passing laws, occasionally we pass laws here which later when they're applied in the field, we ask ourselves, who passed this legislation? Who was it, and what was the thought process that went into this thing? Therefore, Mr. Speaker, each colleague that has spoken, including those that have proposed even further amendments, go on to make this our proposal of how to make our electoral process neater. Mr. Speaker, I want to propose further that I hope, even as we consider further amending this bill, that there can be a way in which the same high standards of poll credibility we are trying to set up in our general elections, we can apply them in our party elections as well, Mr. Speaker. So that you have members of a political party participate, do the nominations, meet certain standards, Mr. Speaker. Party discipline, Mr. Speaker, is an important democratic credential which is heavily lacking in our political culture. Mr. Speaker, I wish it was possible for us to ensure that the threshold for which we set is in line with the manifesto and aspirations of a political party, as such that when you elect an MCA, when you elect an MP, a senator, a governor, a president, a deputy president, Madam Speaker, you are able to hold them to account in line with the ideals and the values of that political party. So that they sign, they know for a fact that I belong to the UDA party. We are of this shade in terms of our economics. We are of this shade in terms of our social political culture. We are of this shade in terms of our religious pluralism, and so on and so forth, Mr. Speaker, such that we don't even have to get to levels of impeaching leaders, Mr. Speaker, that even a party organ on its own can choose to deregister you for advancing certain causes that are not in line with the views and the ideals of the political party that you belong to. It is unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that up to date, we have not been able to organize our politics in such a way that people respect the values of the political parties that they are elected on. And the easiest way to do that, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that the same high standards that we are setting for returning officers in terms of election declaration, in terms of polling stations, where votes can be done, Mr. Speaker, we can have the same replicated and ensure that even at the small level of a political party, we are able actually to successfully organize ourselves in such a way that the party can even bar you and say, Mr. XYZ, we know you're interested in running in our political party, but because of your public pronouncements on this matter, because of this or the other thing that you have done, please be in the know that we shall not be accepting nomination papers from you. And let it be known. And even members of the public to appreciate and know that that person cannot run on a particular ticket